We'll bring this meeting of the Chelmsford Planning Board to order, July 12th. This will be a live meeting, also conducted as a courtesy via Zoom in accordance with applicable law. Should there be any issue with the technological setup, and we will make every effort to remedy the problem and not to exclude anyone from participating. But if we're unable to rectify the problem, then the meeting will not be suspended or terminated. So we will start with public input.
That finishes that one.
Well, was there somebody
Anyone on Zoom?
on Zoom who wanted to
No,
speak?
but Anita has joined us on Zoom.
Okay, so Anita is participating remotely. There was a letter that came in, and it sounded like the Davis people were gonna talk.
Here's a copy right here.
It's right here, yeah.
They weren't sure if the board was going to accept it as part of the MBTA agenda discussion. So I had informed them that they could join the meeting and present it to the board under public input, but they are not with us right now.
Okay. Okay, so let's go back to our tried and true policies and procedures. We had some revisions to review. Did everyone have a chance to look at those, I hope? And did anyone have any thoughts or changes or additional recommendations? I had a question. Under 1.3, public input and public comment, I know we've already decided we're basically holding off on that until the select board reaches their determination and we decide in what way to integrate their thoughts with ours, or whether we just adopt it. But we'll have to assess that. In any case, what about public hearing? We don't really have that in the...
I think public hearing is pretty well defined from a state law perspective.
And so public, and that's so the same as public comment? I mean, it says here.
No, public comment is not the same as,
Right, so this says public
Yes,
comment
close,
during
it's
public
related.
hearing. So do we don't need to worry about defining public hearing?
I don't think so.
I don't
Okay.
think so.
Perfect. Okay. I would say under the role of associate member, the very first sentence in 2.1, it should be attend all planning board meetings, plural. And then should we just take out all the current ones? Like just go through and knock them out? I mean, I guess it's been helpful till now to have them to refer back to as we're kind of toggling, but maybe we could just,
The one thing I don't know from a procedure perspective, if we're adopting a new policy, I'm assuming we just adopt it, but if we're replacing a current policy, we have to make a special motion or vote to
we're
replace
gonna
the...
do that later, though.
No, I know,
So
but
We're
with,
just making,
without me
at this
leaving
point,
some reference in there, we wouldn't know which ones are replacing and which ones are not.
well,
but-
I don't think it necessarily, I mean, these will all replace, the whole set of policies will replace
Okay.
the prior policies. So I don't think that's a distinction we need to make.
Okay, that's fine.
But we're not gonna approve them until first we've approved, like, agree that this is a reasonable draft, and then we'll send it to Paul Haverty to get his feedback, and then we'll post on the agenda, and then we'll discuss it maybe with public input, depending on what people think, and then finally vote on it. Does that seem like what we have decided?
Would there be a clean copy to see
Yeah.
and to look
Yeah,
at before
make sure that
voting?
it's a clean
Okay.
copy.
I'm finding these little diddly things, I'm sorry. did we settle on 3.1, subsequent revised agendas may be posted with new materials that are not deemed to be substantial in nature to the proceedings? Is that what we decided to say? First of all, I think it is, but I just wanted to circle around about that. And then I guess the question will be, who's deeming it not substantial?
That was my question, is who's doing the deeming?
I think it would be the chair.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's the default for all such deemings.
Okay, so
Deeming.
you posted with new materials that the chair deems current, like, present tense, to be substantial in nature. And then, when, at the very last bullet of that, whenever clarification is needed on departmental letters and requirements, I would just say, the planning board may ask through the chair and community development. I mean, I don't know that we want to be writing it is recommended, because then if we don't do it, we've gone against our own recommendations.
Mhm.
That seems fair.
Okay, so then the property tax compliance.
Yeah, I have not heard back from town council yet.
All right, so I would like to
Yep.
proceed with just saying, like, the board shall require property tax compliance, like, this will be a new policy, and then town council can respond to
Yep.
us
Okay.
on our draft. The board shall require property tax compliance, so strike, it is recommended that the board, blah, 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 blah. The board shall require property tax compliance for a project seeking approval prior to granting approval for the project. For example, when the planning board consults with various other departments, they will.
That was just, Madam Chair, if I could, I didn't really intend that to be like the policy. That was just me explaining like the reason
Yeah,
for it,
I
so,
think
yeah.
it's, but I
Yeah,
think
let's
it's.
keep it simple.
Yeah, we can, I think simple is better.
They will contact the office of the treasurer, and so it'll be like one on our list, our checkoff list, you know. The DPW says it's okay, it'll be like a letter, right? That we'd be
Yeah, I was
looking
just saying
for.
like it could be a form and we would just
Exactly,
indicate
no
if
issues.
it's up to date or not.
So is it legally in our purview to
That's what we're
That's
looking
what
for.
we're asking
to
town
deny a
council.
project or stop a project because they're not up to date on their taxes?
That's what we're gonna ask town council. I mean, from my perspective, if you're not up to date, and you're seeking approval to develop your land or develop your property, I would think that's the time to ask someone to become compliant when we have that leverage. But
It would, I think the one exception that I could think of to that would be if the matter was actually in negotiation or litigation. And I don't know that we necessarily need, I mean, this is policy. No matter how hard we write it, we can waive it. And
True.
I think if we put it in the way you've described it, we can, in those cases, I think, just say, all right, for the purposes of this matter, we'll go forward. And I think that's a
And my
good way to do
intention
it.
is to check with 2 or 3 other towns. I just haven't had
Yeah.
enough time to do that, but I'd like to check with 2 or 3 larger towns comparable to Chelmsford.
Does that happen often?
It's happened several times over the years.
Yeah.
That's just kind of annoying.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, sometimes some guy just forgets, but I think more often it's when you're dealing with a developer who plays the finances, well, you know how they do that. Plays them a little tight,
Cash flow.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, usually when you're doing any kind of a transaction, you have to pay any old taxes before the transaction's
Right.
completed. Like if you're selling your house,
Yeah,
before you get paid by the bank,
you have to
by
pay
the
off the
buyer, you
liens.
have to pay off the taxes, I think.
Yep.
Okay, so then, again, on project submissions and impact litigation, oh, no, that's what we were just talking about, sorry. So then the next one, we don't know an amount. I think we're gonna revise that amount. Are you gonna get some new numbers for us on that?
Yeah, I've met with DPW director and the town manager last week just to brainstorm this. The initial thought is to use an entirely different formula, rather than parking spaces to use total square footage. The challenge with parking spaces is that, in 270 Billerica Road is a good example, based upon the way the board has interpreted it over the years, they only apply it to new parking spaces created. So when you have a redevelopment project, whether it's River Neck Road, Billerica Road,
Interesting.
13 Acton Road, that policy is not really well fit for the kinds of development the planning board is seeing. So, one option is for the board to continue the policy but not differentiate between new and existing, and just say, anytime a new project comes in, we're not going to credit you for existing parking spaces, and we'll charge you $100. That may be the simplest approach, but we thought there was some merit to explore total square footage. So I'm in the process of trying to see what other towns are doing.
Perfect.
It's proving to be a little bit difficult, because there aren't a lot of towns that seem to have a similar policy. I think they address this on a case-by-case basis, based upon DPW input, or police department input, or board input, and they tie it to the actual impacts associated with traffic and new trips and things of that nature. So it's a work in progress. But I think, maybe over the next 2 to 4 weeks, the board members can give it some thought as well, to see what strategy or formula may make sense.
I mean, it could be an either or, you don't get credit for your existing parking spaces, you can either pay on the whole number of parking spaces, or in the case of redevelopment, maybe pay an incremental amount, but it will be a higher amount per parking space.
Could do that, yeah, exactly.
Or the square footage, and maybe whichever's the highest, or whichever's the median, or whatever, I don't know.
Right, and they're all a little complicated. Using square footage, you'd have to differentiate between residential and non-residential. Then the newest theme, does the board want to consider truck spaces differently than car spaces? And that's a new theme. So I think there's a lot to think about before we actually decide on a number.
Okay. So we'll revisit this, but.
Yeah, I think if you're trying to get the package to council, I think we could remove the 4.2 in its entirety.
And put it at the end.
Yeah,
when we
because,
decide
council's
on-
not gonna really have much of a, I don't think that's a legal
Right.
review.
Right, true, okay. Performance guarantees. Or sureties, we didn't really, it seemed to me like what we kind of came up with, that when a surety is recommended, it's usually the DPW that recommends it.
Yeah, I think what the board wanted to capture here was something to the effect that the board shall take the recommendation, or have a minimum, and/or, shall accept the recommendation and shall have a minimum bond amount at all times.
And I would just like, on that too, if I could just have a couple more weeks to just check with 3 to 4 comparable towns, just to see what they have, just to compare. It doesn't mean that we have to take the language from those towns, but.
Yeah.
The form is not really needed at this point.
We're not gonna have
Yeah,
passbook, obviously.
yeah.
Okay, and then I felt we had kind of decided to get rid of the conservation and walls and structure, retaining walls. Those aren't really the retaining walls might be historic, it might be DPW, might be the building inspector. The storm water is all pretty much legally directed by the stormwater
Yeah.
management law at this
Yeah, I would
point.
agree.
So I don't think we necessarily have to have, it comes under the DPW that we accept their recommendations and hope, and rely on them to enforce them. I don't know, does anyone have a different opinion about that?
I think you want to hang on to the water conservation for two reasons. One is that water's a very important issue for our town because we rely on our town wells.
I'm sorry, what?
Because water is an important issue for our town because we rely on town wells, so we don't rely on other things. So conserving water is an important issue for us, and also because as part of site plan review and also in special permit review, landscaping is always an issue, and it would be good to have some guidelines in place that applicants know beforehand that they're going to need to meet certain requirements about conservation of water in their plans.
Well, I think we should have, maybe we should have a section on landscaping.
You do within your regulations.
Yeah.
If you recall, right before Nancy left, we beefed that up.
Right, when made this certain.
Yeah, so I don't think the policy is necessary, but the spirit and intent's captured in your regulations.
Yeah.
And then as board members know, we have boilerplate conditions in every one of your decision that talk about water conservation, can't use.
Require compliance.
Yeah, and a lot of this is interdependent and interrelated to the water districts and how they operate, related to irrigation, things of that nature. But the meat of what you're trying to accomplish here is within your regulations.
Okay, that's good. Actually, one thing I wanted to back up on was the sureties or the performance guarantees, is that there was wording in there about also being able to obtain an estimate prepared by another qualified professional. And I think that wording would be good to keep. If you run into cases where you have sort of unusual circumstances that you think are sort of beyond the DPW's expertise, and you don't want to appear arbitrary by asking for it at that time. So if you have it already in your policy, then you can say, if you say, well, we want to get an estimate from, this particular expert because of this unusual situation, that the applicant wouldn't say, well, you're being unfair to me.
Punitive or
You're trying
something,
to, jack up your bill, so to speak, and we can turn to our policy and say, well, we have the option to do that. So that's why I think that wording would be.
Some of that may be in your rules and regulations. I think when we get to the point of adopting this, we may want to put the performance guarantee in the regulations rather than as a policy.
Right.
Would be.
Well, and so that, I was, the last thing I was gonna bring up at the end of this is, I was looking at the rules and regulations, and I feel like, I don't know, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not certainly an expert on these matters, but, would it make sense to have the rules and the regulations and the policies kind of as one set of guidelines, or one, I mean?
I know, yeah, they have different, they bind in different ways.
Yeah.
Okay,
I think,
If they're on the same site, it doesn't matter.
Right.
You can just
That's
download
close
them
enough.
both.
I think what you're dealing with here is the first part of these policies are how the board is going to govern itself and interact with the public hearing and the input. The regulations speak somewhat to how the board conducts its business, but a lot of the regulations are more guidance to the applicant and giving the board the authority to do peer review, to hold bonds, things of that nature.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So my suggestion is on where the board wants to regulate itself through policy. I think you keep that out of your regulations.
okay,
I agree with that.
that makes sense.
I did have a couple of other things that we
Sure.
haven't passed over to back, I'll go backwards now.
Okay.
So on the 3.4, the individual visits, where it says that basically all the same, criteria apply. One of the first criteria is that you have to post it. So obviously that is not going to be the case if you're doing an individual visit, so.
With the exception of posting.
With the exception of, right, exactly, okay. The 3.2, this is, I'm not saying that this should be a part of the policy, but it's something to consider, and maybe this has already been considered, but if there are technical difficulties with the Zoom meeting and there are members Zooming in, then what happens if you, for example, don't have a quorum or that sort of thing? And I don't know this ever happened, but
There's the mall.
That's a good question.
So I thought there's something, I don't know if that needs to be in a policy, per se.
Well, I
but
think
we ought
It
to at
would be
least-
whatever would happen if that person got up and walked out of the room.
Yeah,
That's what I would imagine.
Without a quorum, you cannot continue the meeting.
Right.
okay. I mean, and I'm fine with that. It's just that we spell so many things out in that section.
Yeah.
I kind of thought spelling out what happens if you actually lose board members because of technical difficulties.
That actually isn't addressed in the state
I know,
lines either.
I know.
Yeah.
Anyway, then in 1.3, it makes reference to unusual circumstances that a subject be discussed at the time. And I was wondering, is there just any sort of an idea of what those unusual circumstances might be? Or is that basically just a loophole?
Well,
that we're
if
trying
they're
to make work?
unusual, it means we haven't anticipated them.
Well, yeah,
It's
but I mean,
kinda-
you know the genre, the family of things that you think might happen as opposed to a specific instance. I didn't know if you had any in mind or not.
I don't know.
And
I
then-
actually pulled that language from somewhere, and I don't remember exactly where I pulled it from.
Okay.
Well, it's my basic thought, I don't ever want to talk about anything and deliberate on anything that's brought up at public
Right,
input.
right.
And my, like, kind of stock response is, okay, well, if we need to discuss that, we'll put it on the agenda.
Right, well,
for
I'm just wondering,
subsequent
do
meeting.
you want to strike it? I mean, do you just not even want to put in our policy what we would do, that we would consider that as an option?
Like, look at the planning, board doing the dance.
Because it just begs the question.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
What number is that?
It's 1.3.
1.3.
Yeah.
So then why don't we just strike that and just say, any matter presented under public input will not be debated or acted upon by the board at the time it is
And
presented.
again,
You
this is
can-
policy,
yeah.
so if we really had to waive it, we
Yeah,
could waive it
you could.
at that
Yeah,
point.
and that, I think that'd be more appropriate, yeah.
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 And then in 1.2, I think there's talking about public input, but once you've closed the open hearing, then there can be no input, not even from the applicant.
That's right.
And I think that's something
Yeah.
that, I don't know if we want to explicitly state that, but that's happened a couple of times with this board, and I think that
then
that's
we've
something we want to be
reopened the-
conscious of.
We've reopened.
Well, I mean,
the public
it's,
hearing.
it's
No,
actually
the applicant
fuzzier
just
than you
started
think.
talking, and
It's fuzzier than you think, because, what is new input? New input is not necessarily anything that the proponent would say.
Actually, it is.
Well,
according
I'm
to the
not so
guidelines.
sure. I think there may be situations in which you might want to ask a definition of a word or something.
Right, exactly, and that was what we did a while ago.
Yeah.
On ZBA, is when we had closed the open hearing, and then a question came up in our,
And sometimes you just
what we call
reopen the hearing.
deliberations, then.
Yeah, but there's been some conversation, we've had a couple of.
We've had a couple that went
situations
beyond
where
that, oh, I agree.
We've had a conversation, then someone mentioned, oh, we should reopen it.
Yeah, and then we do. We usually.
reopen it.
At that point, we
Right.
reopen it, and
It doesn't hurt.
So in the guidelines for public hearings that Evan sent me, a bunch of different links, it actually does say that if there are any other questions or clarifications from the applicant, the public hearing has to be reopened.
Right, okay. Okay, yeah,
I think if
That's
we
fine.
realize that's happening,
It's good, Ben.
that's what we do.
Yeah.
yeah, I agree.
and
So
that's
if
a-
everyone tries to pay attention, and if I didn't notice, tell me,
That sounds
or
good.
whomever is the chair.
That was all I had, thank you.
Okay. I think, do we kind of agree this is a working draft minus the things that we don't think need to go to Haverty at the moment? And then, so maybe we should, I don't know that you necessarily want to be the one to do this, because you've been so kind, the two of you, to
Well, him mostly.
devote your
I got
time
in
and
the
energy.
first two meetings,
But
and
I
let him
think
do the details.
maybe we should do a similar thing and just look at the rules and like I noticed the other night when we were talking about, this isn't on the agenda, but when we were talking about applicability, like that's in the rules, but applicability is kind of a yes/no question. It's not really, like, does this project fall under the zoning district, or does it not? It's a fact, or it's
What rules, are you talking about the site plan?
applicability. I'm talking about
Oh,
applicability. Applicability,
You're suggesting doing a similar exercise for the existing rules and regulations?
exactly.
okay.
And I don't know who wants to
Wouldn't be a bad
do
thing.
that. who wants to own that as like the leader of that project or the champion of that project. But I think that that's something we also should do, kind of related to this current project and an extension of it.
Well, I would certainly be willing to do that, knowing that I wouldn't be able to vote on it.
That was a little big.
Well, if you would be, that would be great, Joel.
Yeah, sure.
I'd be willing to help them too, since I've
I
already
knew
started.
you would. So if you can point me at those, that'd be good.
Yeah, send you the link.
Thank you.
Okay. So now we are,
And Deirdre, what I'll do is I'll clean up this copy.
send it along.
Do you want me to send it to the whole board again, or just to you to send to Paul?
What do you guys think? Do you want to have more input to the last bit? I mean, we didn't really make much
No, I
Substantive.
think we're there.
there. Okay.
Okay, so I'll mark it up, send it to you, and Evan to get to Paul.
Um, Okay. So on we go to NEMCOG MBTA zoning. That was quite a packet there.
Just give me a moment, I'm trying to bring something up here. What's it called?
It's in the folder, Mike.
Oh, okay. PDF.
The PowerPoint.
I don't know if it's gonna bring up the PowerPoint or not. I can try.
While we're waiting, one thing I'd like to remind everybody is that the CEIOD is pronounced SEOD, not CEOID.
That was bothering you.
Are you for real?
It was really bothering me.
Tomato? I say tomato.
It's an overlay district, so it ends with odd.
Okay.
True.
I don't think you're gonna change me on that. FYI.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Micah Shola, Senior Housing and Land Use Planner with NIMCOG, Northern Middlesex Council of Governments. We're the regional planning agency for the Greater Lowell region, comprised of 9 municipalities. And we're currently working with 7 of the municipalities on the NBTA zoning compliance project. So we're working directly with Billerica, Dracut, Chelmsford, and Tingsbury, and then providing regional assistance as well. So tonight, basically, we'll just kind of go through what compliance, some of the compliance parameters are for Chelmsford, and then review a series of 8 area scenarios that to gain compliance with the draft scenarios. We did make a recommendation as kind of a guidance, and by no way is a representation of your decision, and I'm happy to work with you to edit and kind of put it and kind of find the right parameters, but it was kind of just a basis to see exactly where a compliant model would be. So again, with MBTA communities legislation, it's allowing by right multifamily housing of a reasonable size without restrictions on age, and it has to be suitable for families with children. The minimum gross density has to be 15 units per acre, and from the last meeting, the feedback that we got was that we'd like to be towards the lower end of that. So the reasonable size for Chelmsford's defined as it's an adjacent community, and then the capacity and size, it would be about 1,477 units, and the minimum acreage would be 50 acres.
Before you go much further, just go ahead, Anita.
So, is that that we have to have minimum 50, but can we have 100 acres? And then would the 1477 be half if we went to 100?
No, the minimum number of units has to be 1477.
Okay, but we can have up to 100 acres, right?
Yep.
Or is there no limit on the acreage?
There's no limit on on a maximum amount of acreage, just the minimum.
So we have 1,400 units, then that 15 unit would go down if we had additional acreage. 15, so it would be 7.5 units if we had 100 acres.
No.
Do the math.
No?
So if we go to the next slide, I have the breakdown kind of. If you were to go at 15 units per acre, it would take approximately 98 developable acres to achieve the units. Adversely, if you were to say go with only a 50 developable acres, you're looking at about 29.5 units per acre. If so.
Okay, thank you. This answers my question. Thank you.
Yeah. So if we're looking kind of on the missing middle housing, the diagram that's on this slide, kind of the 15 units per acre is more towards the duplex, fourplex side of the kind of spectrum there, and then.
Is that where the red arrow is?
No, that's kind of more towards the top of the spectrum. That's just terminology.
So what's that red mark at?
Cross out.
Yeah, that's just changing the name from to triple decker. That can be anywhere, probably more likely like the 30 units per acre.
Okay.
But it depends on the site and the obviously the size and configuration. So we did break down, like I was saying, some scenarios.
Actually, before you go on,
Yeah.
let's get back to what I was going to say. So just for clarification, what we're talking about as opposed to comprehensive permits or 40B where you have to produce units. Here, what we're talking is about producing zoning.
Yep, it's about capacity, and it doesn't matter what's underneath currently.
Right.
It could be a vacant parcel, it could be a parcel that is a multifamily development like a 40B.
Right, okay.
Yep.
But I've got a couple questions on that. If we do, say, that 98 developable acres, so that we're targeting that 15 unit density, can a developer still come in and do a higher density in an area and then throw off our density equations?
So.
Can't you zone it really tight?
Yeah, you could zone it so it's on that parcel, you can't go above the 15 units per acre.
Okay, so we could zone to control the density. So then my next question is, if current property owners don't like the density, there are currently rules in place where property owners could grandfather themselves based on some legal actions that they can take. Are they allowed to do that with this MBTA zoning?
I'm not sure I understand the context.
So we had a couple situations in town where we changed the zoning to restrict large warehouses or distribution centers. There are a couple landowners who did not want to be held under that zoning change. So there were things that they could do to essentially grandfather the property with the old zoning.
Subdivide.
Yeah, subdivision.
Yeah, is that allowed to happen under these MBTA zones? So if we make changes to areas, are they allowed to essentially bypass? And that would completely mess our
Can
calculations
pursue the
up.
zoning freeze under the State Zoning Act. What's interesting here is that the MBTA zoning is by right. So as you know, most of the grandfathering provisions that someone would seek in Chelmsford aren't necessarily by right. So the property owners who think that they may have property rights taken away, once they get into the MBTA zoning, may view it differently.
But is the density that we're setting based on those zonings also by right? So, for example, can they choose to not grandfather themselves for the MBTA zoning, but if they're not happy with the density zoning that we're setting, can they?
So, I understand your question. So the RM multifamily zoning district allows 8 units an acre. The COID does not regulate units per acre, and nor does the Center Village Overlay District. They regulate FAR. As I've mentioned in the past, the board has approved, the maximum has been 20 units an acre under COID. So technically, I mean, COID doesn't have a max unit per acre, but it's a special permit. So there's pros and cons, right, from a legal perspective, as to if someone wants to freeze their zoning. If they do choose to freeze their zoning, they're still eligible to participate in any new zoning that's created. In this particular case, though, I mean, 15 units by right via site plan it's a lot more predictable than any
Better
special
vehicle for
permit.
them, because it's a better vehicle for them, because
It's
it's
a
by
much,
right.
it's a much
Yeah.
better legal mechanism for a developer or an investor.
So if we were to choose areas to do this MBTA zoning, we would essentially be changing the underlying zoning.
Have to, you could do an overlay, or you could
Then
change.
we're stuck again with them not, it would essentially, if we don't,
They can get the zoning freeze, whether it's an overlay or an underlying zoning change.
right, but if they don't like our density requirements on the MBTA side, they could choose to go with the underlying zoning.
Which would be
Which
more
special-
Yeah,
restrictive.
we don't have any place in town where our underlying zoning is going to permit.
By right.
By
By
right,
right,
15.
15 an acre.
special permit.
This is going to be more permissive for
So
them.
if they were in the COI now, and their property got rezoned to MBTA, they could come in under COID, same exact 50 units an
Yeah.
acre, but it's likely going to trigger some sort of special permit.
Okay.
I mean, in the end, again, you're discussing what might happen as a result of this, right? But as far as what we're being asked to do, the state has said to produce this zoning.
Oh, yeah,
Whatever happens as a result of our producing that zoning, whatever people do as a result of that is obviously something they're going to have to worry about.
oh, yeah, I'm just thinking about when we choose the actual locations for where this is gonna go, that might play into the decision-making.
Because by right does not come through the planning board, right? Like, the
Right.
the
It
MBTA
does.
zoning is by right, we don't see it, it's not a special permit.
It comes
We
through
don't
you
have
through
any-
site plan,
Site plan.
just like UMass West.
Yeah.
It would come to the planning board under
Okay.
site plan approval.
But it's just a different permission level.
Yeah.
A site plan, you can't prohibit. You can shape, but you can't prohibit. A special permit, you can deny.
Deny.
That's the difference.
Right.
So tonight, I'm going to present 8 areas that I actually, this weekend, ran through the compliance model. So I did give you kind of the parcel list prior with some maps so we could see the areas. And now it's a little bit more, I'm going to show you some scenarios that are a little more refined. And again, the ones that we're recommending are just kind of a base to take in, and we can work around editing or adding different areas that you see fit. But all the areas that were run through the compliance model and selected were areas that were either identified through the action plan, master plan, or discussions from last month with you all and town staff.
So did you run these through, the compliance model?
Yeah, so I did, what you're seeing now, the scenario assumptions, these are some of the variables that that we can kind of manipulate. And in this case, I capped the maximum developable, maximum dwelling units per acre at 15, and cap on the zone at the 1477. I used 4 stories as the height restriction, 1.6 parking spaces, a minimum lot size of 40,000 square feet, and then I used the setbacks that were in the UMass Lowell zone for this exercise, and then kept the open space down to 20% for this exercise. So this is kind of the locus map of where the scenarios are. A lot of them are focused in the in the north and along the Lowell border, and then along 110 there are also several scenarios.
Can we change number 6 to a blue?
Yeah, we can talk about it. So the first scenario, I looked at the area just to the north of Vinyl Square on North Tingsboro. There were three parcels containing multifamily developments that seemed underdeveloped. The rear yards in all these properties do contain some wetlands and some floodplain designations. There were some opportunities here being located near Vinyl Square for some economic development impact, and the potential for a complete neighborhood or 15-minute neighborhood development. It's service.
What's a 15-minute neighborhood development?
Just that you can walk to, within 15 minutes, you can walk to a variety of elements, stores,
I see.
shopping.
Restaurants, laundromat?
Yeah.
Okay.
Parks. And there's also sewer that was servicing all 3 properties. The challenges that we would face with this would be the significant wetlands that were identified and would limit additional development. It would be suitable for compliance with other districts. However, when you look at the gross density, we would have to zone it to 28.2 acres, units per acre, because of the amount of wetlands that were on this site. But again, in the end, it would end up coming out to 15 units per acre. If you go to the next slide, this kind of gives you the breakdown of the.
Can we go back to that for a minute?
Yeah.
You just said we'd have to zone it for 28 units?
The developable land, yes.
Remember, the compliance model takes out all undevelopable land. Anything that's wet, buffer zone, riverfront, aquifer protection, I think, is taken out. That's the state model.
And it has to be 5-acre unit minimum.
So if you were to choose this district,
You get 28 units out of it.
you'd be zoning for, the zoning bylaw would have to say 28.2 units per acre.
Even if we combine it with other,
This
This particular
sub-district
sub-district.
would have to have that zoning designation. It can be combined with other ones that are at a lower, that have less, not undevelopable lands.
but that would still allow someone to develop 28 units in this location
Of how many acres is it?
by right.
6?
Right.
5.8?
Well, if.
Buildable?
But there isn't that, there's so much undevelopable land that it's gonna factor in.
8.8 buildable acres.
You wouldn't be, the capacity is only gonna be able to yield 249 acres.
Your 447 units, the state model requires those units only can be built on developable land as
Right,
defined by the state.
Right, but a particular contiguous portion has to meet the 15.
So
In
I'm-
totality, right.
So what's the,
But-
can I just, the current development that's there, that's currently at how many units per acre? How many acres is
I don't
it?
think you calculated
Yeah, I
existing.
haven't calculated.
But that's what you used with the 8.8 to come up to the 28.2?
No,
No,
use the
it does-
15. He
It,
used-
it doesn't matter what's
I
there.
mean, to get to 15, you took the
Units per
current
acre.
already developed part and added on the undeveloped part.
No, so the developed land that's currently there doesn't have an impact on the calculation.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just
So
simply
the-
looking, simply
So we
looking
wouldn't
at.
be talking about redeveloping the existing properties that are there at the same time?
There'd be a potential to maybe increase.
Just look at the districts as a blank slate.
Yeah.
And the only thing we're calculating is what's developable
Filling
per
in
the
the
state
blank-
definition. and
Filling
what-
in the
what is-
blank part.
Yeah, basically, you're starting with your total.
There's no redevelopment involved in this.
Correct. The compliance model does not contemplate redevelopment.
That doesn't
What
make
if
any
you
sense.
did?
No, it's for the purpose of computing whether you're complying or not. You start with a number of acres, and you say it's 15, the density of 15 per acre. Then you shrink that down because it's not all buildable.
Right.
No, I
And
understand,
then
but
you-
what
then you
about the
come up
part
with
that's
a
already
final-
built?
No, that's irrelevant.
That's irrelevant. This,
if
again,
you
again, this
rebuilt
is
it?
for the
You
purpose.
could tear it down.
Yeah, it doesn't, this is.
Well, they can't do
this is
that by
completely
right?
independent of that. What we're discussing is essentially how you determine that your zoning complies. That's it. It's not talking about what's there. It's not talking about what you're actually gonna do. It doesn't have anything to do with that. It just has to do with what kind of, that's why I raised the point in the beginning. This is all about what kind of zoning are we putting in place? So they look at, we say, here's a portion that we're going to apply this zoning to. Then they take that and they use their GIS stuff and they go and they come back and they say, okay, well, NIMCOG is letting us know. It has to be 28.2. If you don't do that, it doesn't meet the requirement, we don't comply, it doesn't count.
So,
That's it.
so on this scenario here, scenario one, why did you pick certain lots and not the whole neighbors abutting those that are already built with homes on them? Why weren't they part of the scenario where we can put an overlay over them?
Yeah, well, a lot of those properties wouldn't meet the minimum lot size.
And then if you
So are
combine
you
them
looking
with
at
the-
existing lots and that's how that's how the acreage is coming out? Or is it, can you combine? Can you say, hey, this is an area, we just gotta combine the lots?
You can't in this exercise.
Okay.
With the compliance model, it takes it takes individual parcels.
But as a board, can we make recommendations of a vast area of a neighborhood that
Yeah.
could have an overlay?
Yeah. You could zone it that way, but it's those parcels, even if you add them up, they wouldn't count towards the unit capacity. It wouldn't calculate in the compliance model. So it would kind of end up being undevelopable land in that case. So it'd be like the same thing of,
So is your minimum here 1 acre?
yes.
So that's what started this whole, is the 1 acre. So these
Yeah.
lots here are greater than 1 acre or greater?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we can, that's one or one variable that we can control with the compliance model. So we can, if you wanted to go to 20,000 square feet for a minimum, we could do that too.
So the acre, the minimum 1 acre is an artifact of your analysis?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
That's easy to understand now. I was just
Yeah.
wondering why you picked one, couple of lots here right on 110 and not the other ones. So,
Yeah.
I'm still
Yeah,
struggling with the density calculation for the lot. So I thought that the minimum of 15 units per acre was based on the total amount of buildable area that we're zoning. But it sounds like it's based on the total billable or buildable amount of that property. So it's not, so if we added this to, say, 200 other buildable acres, we would still be stuck at the density of 28 units and not a total of 15 units on each property.
In the end, it would be 50. When calculating the undevelopable, it would bring it to 15, 1 to 15.
Well, if
But-
we went to 200 acres, wouldn't it go down to 7.5?
No, it would be the minimum's 15.
It would just be closer to 15.
So this particular property has 8.8 developable acres. At 15 units per acre is much more than 28. How does that not calculate?
That's the developable density. The actual unit capacity would be 249.
You couldn't make that 15, though. That can't be 15. That has to be 28.
It would end up bringing the overall density below 15 to 1.
Oh, because of the lot size.
Yeah. So, NIMCOG's recommendation would be not to include this scenario in our final.
So would it be fair to summarize that if you had a portion that was completely buildable, you would be able to have a density of 15?
Yep.
If you had a portion that was partly buildable, then the density will be higher than 15. And
Goes
it'll
up.
go up,
Yep.
the less
Incrementally,
buildable.
You'll see
That's
that when we go
easier.
through the other scenarios.
Yeah. And this is the most drastic
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it is.
of all.
So you're not recommending it because it's too dense? Correct?
Just because, well, the lack of capacity
Okay,
as well.
too small and too dense?
Yeah.
Okay.
In the same neighborhood, again, Vinyl Square still having some issues with wetlands and floodplains, but here we had four parcels containing multifamily developments of commercial use, and the properties are zoned RM, with the exception of a small CM that's paralleling the roadway. Again, a lot of the same reasons why, a lot of the same opportunities that were identified in scenario 1 were identified in scenario 2. However, again, the challenges where there are wetlands and could limit potential developments, and potential issues with condo associations, maybe not entertaining further development, really kind of limited this one on ability to potentially get more units constructed. So we weren't, and this would yield 270 as modeled. So we would not recommend that
I
one.
thought we're zoning. So just because there's a condo association there now, like, our job is to zone, not to build.
Yeah,
But we can't,
that's just,
we
this
can't, like,
is,
so why, like, I guess why are we looking at that? I mean, that's like time
NIMCOG's tasked with looking at viability. The board does not necessarily need to consider viability.
confused with, like, why we're not, like, we're only, like, the first one, we didn't include the other lots because they were already built on, but I thought, like, all we're supposed to do is look at the zoning, regardless of what's on there now.
No, so NIMCOG's task as the consultant is to identify opportunities and challenges, bring those to the board's attention. And as Chris mentioned earlier, at the end of the day, the board is going to make recommendations to town meeting, and the board and individuals on the board may be more strategic based upon existing conditions and what could potentially happen. But NIMCOG is tasked with bringing to the board's attention the viability of these proposed districts. So they're pointing out, short-term, intermediate, and long-term challenges for implementation, as well as the spirit and intent of the MBTA zoning, which is ultimately to create zoning that provides an opportunity.
in the end, we're here to support you and give you what you need to adopt compliant zoning, and get it past town meeting. So if you feel strongly that You know, and some of the suggestions I made were just to kind of get us to look at what a whole compliant district might look like, and kind of use that as a basis, and then maybe add or subtract from there.
That's perfect, you're giving us the information we need.
Yeah.
When we were talking about it being independent of what's currently there, we were referring to how it's assessing compliance. So when we were talking about, it doesn't take into consider what's there, we were talking about how the state assesses our compliance, not about what our strategy might be and
Exactly.
in what we select and how we select it and so forth and so on. So yes, we definitely want to consider what's underneath, as you did in the last meeting. I think quite appropriately suggested certain places for strategic reasons. And that's certainly something we want to keep in mind. But for the purpose of assessing compliance, it's independent of what's there. I don't know if that helps or not.
So scenario 3, is the UMass Lowell West area. This was the main area that was identified in the action plan to the EOHLC. Still struggling with that acronym, but so this is potentially like you adopted zoning for multifamilies last year, so it's included as kind of the centerpiece of a potential compliant district. It includes the UMass Lowell West campus parcel, and then 2 built-out condominium developments. Those were included for a couple reasons. One being, if we need to get if we're looking at zoning at the lower end of the density spectrum, we're going to need almost 100 acres of gross area, gross developable area. So this, when we add those 2 parcels to the UMass Lowell site, we get about 70 gross acres, and of that, about 57 of them are developable. With this, it would be difficult judging from the layout of the 2 built-out parcels that any additional units in the same style would be able to be built there. But the UMass Lowell site would be a prime candidate for redevelopment.
So that would count for 1,000 units, basically 1,043?
Yep. So, yeah, almost, if we included all those, we're 400 units or so from compliance.
That sounds great.
Okay, but, I'm sorry,
I'll vote for that one.
Yeah. But am I not correct that it was like 8 units per acre? What we approved for the UMass
It
Lowell?
was 15.
It was 15.
The zoning.
The
yep.
zoning is 15, but it's actually,
I think the approval was for 12.
was it 12?
That was, yeah, that's what
So
they,
that, it's not developed yet, so that doesn't, they won't take that into consideration? Like you were saying with those other parcels,
Yeah,
redevelopment.
yeah. I mean, the compliance should be based on what you're zoning, so it should be
We've already
regardless.
zoned this.
To see,
Yep.
because they're-
This
We
would,
could still use it
this
towards
would,
this.
this would require either changing the existing zoning, UMass West overlay district,
Yeah.
or creating an
To
MB,
include the other 2 parcels?
and to revise it slightly.
Yes, so, yeah, so it has.
Okay.
Yeah, and we can get into the zoning of that area more kind of at the next step. There's also one of the parcels that's a multifamily development there was identified as a potential land use conflict in the zoning conflicts report, which we'll go over next. So we could potentially address all those issues at once.
But if we included this, the density would slightly increase from the current.
Correct.
Okay.
And it would be by right.
Yeah. And the new density would be 18, if I'm reading this correctly?
Of the developable, correct.
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
too.
Well, it would need to be 18 in order for us to get credit.
Yeah, to be compliant, yeah. Another area that was identified at the last meeting was the area around the UPS facility. There were 4 parcels in total. 2 have structures on them, one pretty large structure that you could probably see from space. But they're both, all the parcels are within the IA zone and the CEI overlay district. There are significant wetlands and floodplains on the undeveloped parcels or the partially developed parcels. The boundaries for this, again, you couldn't get compliance just through rezoning these based on the restrictions with the wetlands and undevelopable land. So this would almost get you the compliance with 1379. However, the likelihood of redevelopment of the UPS site is probably low. And then if it were to be redeveloped, there could be a potential economic development. It could impact economic development for the town. So it was NIMCOG's recommendation that wasn't included in the final scenario.
What do you mean it could negatively impact? Because warehousing right now, it's 300,000 square foot warehouse, which is the lowest amount of tax revenue we would get. Not a lot of redevelopment happened in that warehouse in the last 40 years, versus housing that would go in. And because a lot of that lot, it's just parking, like it's tractor trailer parking that we don't get any revenue for. So when we say that economic development, I like to actually have the numbers on something like that, because those trucks are not registered in Chelmsford, so we're not getting tax revenue on that, versus a housing development, we would get tax revenue on that. And why we wouldn't include this where we almost hit the numbers, because we don't think it's going to be developed.
Well, I have a concern that if we're, well, a couple concerns. One is I personally feel like it's disingenuous to bring up a thing that's never going to be developed, and I think that we should be looking strategically to look for some additional housing, because that's been identified as something that is needed in the town and the state. And also, I mean, they're a major employer in this town, and I feel like if we went to town meeting and said, we're gonna rezone you residential with high density, like, they're like a major business and a major employer. I don't understand.
I like to see the math before we make that decision of what the impact would be, one way or the other. I don't disagree with you, but let's not just make assumptions here. What is the dollar amount? And
well, I mean, Anita, the dollar amount, you were on.
I get that. I'm just saying.
You were on about the dollar amount last week, about the property in Meeting House Road, but like, you know, you were saying that was going to reduce the tax revenue by 300,000.
Because that's tax. Because warehousing is taxed differently than office building.
It is the biggest employer in town.
There's all sorts of taxes and fees and, you know, jobs and other things to consider, and I don't think that.
But we don't get tax revenue on, like, we don't have an employer, like, even though they're employed, we only get if they're spending in Chelmsford, if they go to a restaurant, if they're using our amenities. That's the only tax revenue we get. So I just want to make sure when we're saying, yes, they're major employees, we don't have a payroll tax. We don't charge, like, Chelmsford doesn't charge payroll tax. There are some towns that are looking into doing that. I think Salem's one of them. So when we're saying that it has an economic impact, we should just make sure that we understand what they are, and I like to see the numbers. So there's no question. We're not throwing out stuff, and we're not putting an opinion in it. We're just looking at the dollars and cents.
Do we actually know
That's
how
all.
how they would feel about it? I mean, if I were UPS, I wouldn't care. I mean, just like if I was grandfathered, I mean, you know, somebody
they're not
who's,
gonna- they're not
if you
doing it
change the
anytime soon.
zoning, it's like, well, so, I mean, I've got what I need and.
They actually, just by us zoning, it doesn't mean they're going anywhere.
No, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, that you're saying is, we should be looking at this to try to put this number of housing in, and not just pick areas that will never be developed.
I think we should probably do both,
Yes.
because I think if we put,
I think we should be
all of these-
strategic, but I mean,
I
she's
think
talking about having this
And
be
this is what
kit and
he's
caboodle.
already doing the thought process already, and he's explaining it now, and you're gonna hit the number, right? Obviously, we're gonna hit the number.
The scenario that I put together is close, and, you know, we
Okay.
could,
I think we just keep going,
Go.
take all the information, and then debate it later.
yeah, good idea. Scenario 5 is an existing, I believe it's a 40B elder 55-plus housing development, and then it abuts on the rear a parcel, about an 8-acre parcel that's underdeveloped with a single-family home on it. This scenario was recommended for inclusion in the next zone. It's approximately a mile to the town center, has easy access to Route 3 and I-495. It's a short drive to the North Bellerica commuter station and is serviced by LRTA bus service. Some of the challenges that we might face would be that it is within the Zone 2 wellhead protection district. There are some wetlands and sensitive lands on the vacant parcel, and the use conflicts identified in the area by the Land Use and Zoning Conflicts Analysis Report, but it's not contrary to the report of potentially rezoning some of the area in there as residential. So you could see in the short to midterm development of the underdeveloped parcel, and then potentially maybe additional units at the site of the existing multifamily. So this area is about 16.1 acres, gross acres, and then it would yield about 241 units.
What is the address of this? I just wanted to look it up real quick.
That's 104 Turnpike,
Yep.
Thank you.
the Kinlock.
Yeah, and that was,
The,
that
the-
parcel was called out specifically at the last meeting.
The other properties on Billerica Road, right across from Apollo.
The one that was clear cut?
No, that's
No.
not right there.
Well, I was thinking-
It's a single-family home there right now.
It's the largest
I don't understand
single-family
why they don't
estate.
have that, too.
So the next scenario, we looked at the Route 110 retail area. There were 11 parcels, including 3 large retail shopping centers with large parking areas. And it's situated at the junction of Route 3 and I-495. It's predominantly zoned CC and CB and entirely within the CEI overlay district. There are significant wetlands and floodplains in the area that impacted a lot of the potential developable areas. Some of the opportunities, the proximity to the shopping centers and the rail trail would encourage non-automotive transportation and support economic viability of vitality. Easy access, again, to Route 3 and 495, and limited local roadway traffic. It also serviced by LRTA bus service, and there are multifamily developments within the area.
This, we're including the old Chelmsford Mall, whatever that's called now, right? In that?
That's the one on the corner, is it?
No, it's right there.
It's in the district.
Dead center, yeah.
It's in the
Okay.
proposed.
The big building right in the middle.
Okay.
Okay.
This scenario was not recommended for inclusion because of the potential negative economic impact to the shopping centers if they were to to not infill develop, but completely redevelop the site. It was thought to be, that could be a negative and kind of a death blow for some of the retail shopping centers. In this, it would be about 55.2 gross acres, and the unit yield would be about 795. But again, it does have about 34 acres of sensitive lands, so that's also something to keep in mind. The sensitive lands are developable in the model, but it's something that may either impact water quality or other kind of unintended environmental issues.
So in that scenario, just a quick question for you.
Yeah.
Why couldn't we rezone that where they could go higher up and put residential above those are just single-story, large
Yeah.
retail? Why couldn't we put an option in there to have the retail on the first floor and then have housing on second and third floor above these and give a developer an opportunity to and put that in the calculations?
Yeah, so you can allow that, but you can't require the commercial on the as a part of the potential development.
Because it's residential by right.
Yeah, and that would be a potential limiting factor for the development of.
But Mike, that's a great idea.
I mean, you see it in other
For
towns.
like separate looking at zoning, that's a great idea to think about separately.
But that might
outside
not,
of-
but as you're saying, Michael, that won't add into our calculations, though. It wouldn't meet the criteria.
Yeah, that restriction wouldn't, that it wouldn't receive approval.
Even though it goes towards the goals of this walkable 15-minute.
Yeah.
Can we put an overlay to allow the commercial part?
Yeah, but what if they don't? Then we lose the commercial.
Well, it's already allowed
Right,
now.
that's the risk.
That's
I
my
think-
concern with not requiring it, is that if we add the residential without the commercial, we lose that commercial.
Well, we don't have to change the underlining zoning, right?
We could do this as a separate concept.
Yeah.
The COID already allows
Right.
mixed use. But the MBTA zoning prohibits requiring mixed use. You can
Right.
incentivize and try to convince them through your incentives. But the
Oh.
MBTA
Well, to be
zoning
honest
is,
with you,
that
that's
you
the
cannot
trend.
require.
Correct.
Right now,
use.
that is the trend, is the mixed use.
Yeah.
On an unrelated note, I don't know if people knew, but what used to be the Howard Johnsons, actually, they proposed a heliport there. The helicopters fly in to Howard Johnson's and fly out.
Where's
I
that?
recall that.
The mall?
No, Howard Johnson's.
Oh, right at Howard.
Yeah, right at Howard Johnson's.
I don't know where that is.
It's where Moonstones
swimming
is.
pool.
Moonstones is what was Howard Johnson's restaurant.
Wait.
And the Best Western is
ground.
where it used to be,
So-
yeah, Ground
Wait,
Round.
so they're gonna tear down Moonstones?
No.
Back in the day.
Back in the day, when it was Howard Johnson's,
I remember that.
there was a plan for a heliport.
Yeah.
This is why the zoning bylaw defines and classifies heliports
Helipads.
and prohibits them townwide. Thank you for explaining
A little
that.
bit of a history there.
Appreciate that.
I have a graphic of the flight plan. It was gonna come in along 495 land and then come out along 495.
Get Jetport. All the high flyers coming to Chelmsford.
So
All right.
on to scenario 7. This is an area on Route 110 going towards Westford. It's the block of RM zone that's kind of on the northern side of 110. We reviewed this as it was almost, with the gross acreage of 48, you'd almost be able to get the 50 gross acreage there. And it would yield about 721 units with potential infill development of the existing multifamily developments. However, we aren't recommending this scenario due to the amount of condominium associations on the property and the likelihood that hundreds of property owners are going to agree on potential additional units. So
Is that serviced by a bus line?
Yeah,
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, it's got one.
It is all the way out that way?
Yeah, it goes to Westford.
All the way down to Westford.
I drove behind it today.
So
Is
any potential development would be a pretty long-term development and waiting for the coordination in that district.
So that's not an issue in terms of assessing compliance, that's just an issue in terms of actual implementation, it's a
Correct.
future point, okay.
Yeah, it could be included in the final final zone that we send to AOLHC, but as far as using the criteria as a livable community to recommend, it's unlikely that we'd be able to achieve what the intent of the law was.
So, does that include the trailer park in there? No, right, that's not included in that piece.
Nope. No, I believe it's 10 parcels, 7 multifamily condominiums. I believe there's a duplex, single-family home, and a bank that are the other 3 parcels.
I mean, we have the trailer park that, I think it's like on 30 acres that we could look at.
You could, it would be, I mean, it would be tough if the trailer park was cleared out.
Yeah.
It would kind of, they create an issue where you'd have a lot of people searching for new affordable housing that might not be available.
Yeah, Anita, we said we probably wouldn't want to do that at the last meeting.
Yeah.
Well, no, well, if we want to really build, like, that would be a place that's, like, definitely, I could see
Yeah,
them
but
building, but we're going to throw out a whole bunch of people that, because we can't make it low, we can't, there's no rules for us to allow subsidized housing, right?
But the likelihood of that being built is pretty high right now, and I would worry about the conversion to the zone with multifamily, with really high rents that would displace a ton of people. So I would not want to include that in this.
Yeah, I mean, just to put this in a little bit of context, complying with 40B law, the town did what it needed to do to comply. It didn't do it with the intent of creating affordable housing. And I think that that's the same sort of balance of philosophy that I'm guessing this board is considering is, what do I need to do to comply? And what can I do to actually
Well, there's nothing about
encourage
this
this sort of
that
thing?
is looking for affordability.
It's
That
not
just-
even.
I'm not saying,
it's
I'm not
even tied to
talking,
it.
I know, I'm
Affordability
not
as a
talking about
criteria.
affordability. What I'm saying is that the intent of what the town did in that case was to comply. The town was not looking specifically for opportunities to create affordable housing. It was doing that through other means. But it was just looking to comply. So it's not the first time this town has done something just to comply.
Moving on to scenario 8, this was, I believe, suggested by the chair, Meeting House Road. It's 4 parcels, all containing office uses located within the CD zoning district and CEI overlay district. The area is located pretty much within the town center and access to many amenities. It would encourage non-auto transportation and support commercial vitality of the downtown. There's potential for complete neighborhood or 15-minute walkable neighborhood. It's serviced by LRTA. It's a potential reuse of office space if viability trends continue with office space. Some of the challenges would be that it is only 9 acres, so it would have to be a sub-district of the larger compliant district. And there are two non-residential condominium associations within those, within the area. But I believe one of them is all under the same ownership.
And they're looking to add housing on the second
Yeah, they
floor.
are.
Oh,
They just came in front of us.
oh, great.
So lot 732956 is the one that's in front of us now.
But I wouldn't want to put this in the MBTA plan, contrary to maybe what I said the other day, because I wouldn't want to lose I mean, I'm,
You could still have it as an overlay, and then the commercial use still be allowed.
Yeah.
Yeah, same with the mall.
You just couldn't require that it be commercial as part of the
Yeah.
district.
It's mixed use.
But then we run the risk of them tearing down what's already there and building something a little bit more dense.
Correct.
Or are you saying that as is, right, like that's where I'm a little,
We didn't include
Concern.
Radisson, that's what I don't understand.
That,
That's sitting vacant right now.
okay.
Could.
no, that's fine. But I'm saying like those buildings on Meeting House Road, those fit the center of the town, they look nice, they're like, they kind of fit the motif. My concern is we put them in this zoning, we can't control,
right.
like, with them being teared down and something else being built. Like, it's by right, they can build whatever, and then we don't, I
Right.
don't know, like, I'm a little concerned with that.
It's the same issue as the shopping centers on 110.
Yeah.
If we allow this, we lose the commercial.
Yeah. Or potentially, and we have no
Yeah.
control over that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to, for that reason, I wouldn't want to put it in this. I mean, I wouldn't, I'm contrary to, you know, Anita was not necessarily in favor of the concept, and I kind of rather like the concept, but I like the idea of having the offices on the first floor and unused office space being redeveloped, but not necessarily with these guidelines. So I like that we have the special permit required in order for them to do that, because I wouldn't want them to build up. I like the idea that they're just using the existing space in a redevelopment way that makes sense for them and for the town.
Why
We-
wouldn't you allow them to build up? There's a lot of big buildings downtown.
It's a perfect spot for it, if you ask me.
You got
For
a
building,
high
yeah.
Radisson's right there next to it. It's a big building.
Used to be the bowling alley. I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah.
I'm thinking big building, 3 stories,
Well, I mean, what
4
I liked
stories.
about the project they brought us is that they're increasing the green space, they're taking away they're taking away parking spaces, it's fitting with the current, there's 4 pieces, there's 4 buildings that are the same and that are not dense, and I like the looks of that, and I like from a planning perspective, I don't necessarily want them to build a bunch of
But we gotta-
All of
we
those
have to find
buildings are
space.
getting to the end of their life cycle. Every one on, that was built on Emerson's farm. There's gonna be a point where they're gonna get redeveloped.
Well, we just approved applicability for one,
Yeah, that's what I mean.
right, but I like.
Right.
What I'm saying is I like the minimalism of that.
Yeah, I get that.
There are
I
ways
have a
to
concern because
control.
this is we're allowing 4 stories here, right? Like, so I've got a concern that it would be incentivized for someone to tear that look down
Right,
and build something that we don't want, and we don't have as much control.
yeah.
It's
and
it's
While I
modeled.
didn't agree with, voting last time, I don't disagree with what you're saying about having, the look of it. It's not that detrimental. I think having this overlay would be more detrimental to the center of town.
In that location. Yeah.
I can look into
Yeah.
modeling it at a different, at 2 or 3 stories and see. Sometimes where the lots are smaller, it'll cap out at a certain, you really won't be able to get more units if you go up 2 or 3 because the required parking and the unit area.
So that's why the Radisson property comes into play, because you actually have a light that lets you out of that, their entry and exit. You're not going onto Fletcher Street. If that was all one parcel, it makes it more palatable.
How big is the parcel that the?
Well,
that
you would add the
No, no,
whole
would it
Radisson.
let's just talk about the one by itself. How big is the parcel that the Radisson sits on?
Well, it's almost the size of the one he just carved out.
Yeah.
When you look at the whole thing, including the other hotel, that has another entryway.
So what if
Right
you-
next to a highway. I mean.
What if you added the Radisson parcel to this, and then take a look at whether you can bring down the height to 2 or 3 stories?
Yeah, that's definitely doable.
Because then maybe that would bring it back
And
into
it
the
might
character of that area.
incentivize the owner of the Radisson to do something with the building.
Yeah.
Well, maybe if his lot's 5 acres, we could just do that by itself.
I think it is. Well over.
Yep.
I think you're right. That's a good idea.
Yeah, so,
Drink a lot of beer in that.
looking at, when we look at the three scenarios kind of combined, we're almost at the 1,400 square feet, 1,477 units. I think we're about 50 units short.
We just had an email, though.
Wait, can you go back again? Okay. So it's 3, 5, and 6, right? Yeah. Okay.
I think it would probably be beneficial to try and pare this down to maybe 2 scenarios. For the next step, the one that I proposed, you can use that as kind of a basis and add or subtract to it, and then maybe another one, or,
This isn't set in stone yet either, right? This is just to start the ball
Yeah.
rolling with the state. That's
Yep.
fine, yeah, works
Yep.
for me.
and then there was the email, I forget what the name of the road is, there were 4 parcels that are.
Riverneck.
Riverneck Road.
It's the hot topic in town.
Yep, so I want to say there was at least 20 acres there.
That was 10.1, isn't it?
Yeah,
No,
buildables.
20.
There's 21 altogether.
Total of about 25 when
What's
you
the
include
buildable?
the vacant piece.
Okay.
But it is a property that we are looking to develop at this point.
Okay, yeah, and I looked at it in the GIS compliance model, and it looked like almost all of it would be developable, so that's an area that we could add in, kind of into the next step.
I would like to remove number 5 from the mix, because I think that almost creates a new or an expanded zoning conflict if we put residential there. So I would worry that we're not improving the
Next to the tree guy, yeah.
conflict there.
Good point.
I thought the recommendation in that section was to rezone to residential.
You recommended for inclusion.
What
And that was-
document you looking at, Mike?
The land use zoning.
Conflict?
Yeah.
So we would lose 241 there, but with the river neck, we would gain more.
And maybe the Radisson.
Oh,
Do you think the
Radisson,
piece of land in the Radisson is sitting on is 5 acres?
I think it's a little more than 5 acres. If you include the other hotel, it's definitely more than 5.
Yeah, I think we should include that. I'm a little bit less, like,
The Hong Kong.
less on board with the meeting house one. to be
With
quite
the what
honest.
one?
Be shy.
I'd rather include the meeting house, like Meeting House Road. I'm a little bit less on board with that one.
Yeah, me too.
Just that, I get concerned. I'd rather do that in a phase 2, like if things, then throw that one in.
That's fair, that's fair.
I think like what they proposed is very
Switch it to the Radisson.
proposed, it's like very controlled growth. which I like.
Yeah, it's the first one that we're,
So why couldn't you do the other hotel there too?
Yeah, you
he
could,
owns both, yeah. They own both.
So why couldn't we
Yeah.
put that under the same scenario?
yeah.
Yeah, all.
So the
all-
two hotels,
Yeah, that whole part.
there's the Holiday Express.
Okay. Is it adjacent to?
Yeah, they
Yeah.
used to be the
It's
same one, they
connected,
split it
actually.
off.
But what's the
Oh.
tax
Like
on
a-
that? I mean, how does that compare to the conversation of tax? You get a hotel there, you're thinking about taking that out?
Yeah, how does that work?
I don't know how that works. I'm just asking the question. I know it's been asked for
Yeah,
everything else.
we earn about roughly, I mean, it's come back, I'd have to look at it, somewhere around, maybe about $500,000 or a little more in hotel tax, but that's for all the hotels townwide.
Okay, so not
So,
just that one.
Not just that one, because we don't get a breakdown by property.
Okay.
So there's how many? There's the Best Western and
Best
the-
Western, Radisson,
Oh, the one up on Drum Hill.
right, Hawthorne, or whatever it's been.
Element.
Element. And
Element.
they're all owned by the same company.
They are?
Yeah, JHM.
Isn't Element a Marriott?
Yeah, they're different. They buy the
Franchise.
franchise.
Different brands.
I would also like to put UPS back into the mix as well. I think that
It's not needed though at this point. That's the kicker. We're at the number.
Yeah, but I think that would be a benefit to the town.
Why don't you table it? I think Mike is gonna you're gonna run the two hotels and you're gonna run River Neck.
Yep.
Maybe, so it sounds like you've eliminated some tonight.
yeah,
Maybe UPS is, just let it hang there for a little bit and
So that'll be a maybe.
Yeah.
So we've eliminated Turnpike and Billerica and potentially Meeting House and replaced it with the hotels.
Yeah.
I think the board will feel a lot more definitive once you see River Neck. You'll have a good
Yeah.
feeling as to whether you want to
Yeah.
put it on the table or not put it on the table, and
Okay.
That should be it with adding River Neck and the Radisson, but eliminating the two smaller, just
Yeah.
Yeah.
5
Yeah.
and 8 should.
strategically, it sounds like you're focusing on larger opportunities.
Yeah.
Larger properties with bigger capacity.
With less zoning conflict.
Yeah, with
Less zoning conflicts.
less
and
districts, right,
Also less potential to impact
right.
surrounding areas.
Traffic.
Traffic is a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're talking about viability, we really have to think about the traffic.
Yeah.
So which ones are you?
Evan, quick question for you.
Yes?
I've got a question for Evan. On River Neck, now, can they build to the density that we're proposing?
It has to
So
get
under,
rezoned.
thought they
under
could.
the, so they're part of the 129 overlay district, the Bayard.
Yeah.
That allows multifamily, it requires a special permit.
At what density?
It does not regulate density, it uses FAR.
Oh, okay, okay. So they could come in and propose something, but it'd just be through a special permit, it's through the process is different. Okay.
Correct, correct.
They don't want to go through that again. I get it.
So which ones are being eliminated? 5 and 8?
5 and 3.
5 and 3.
And 5 and 8.
Not three, not three.
Or sorry, 8.
Let's do a roll call. Section 1, in
So
or
on slide
out?
29, there seems to be a typo then.
Is section 1 in
All
or
right,
out?
scenario one, can we get to it?
You want a scenario one?
I'm lost on my computer.
North Kingsborough.
Well, you had not
Road.
recommended that.
That was a non-recommendation, all right.
So-
Of the ones you recommended, can we go through those?
3,
3 we're keeping.
Yeah, that's good.
UPS 4 you're tabling for for future consideration. 5 you're eliminating. 6 you're eliminating. 7 you're eliminating. And 8 you're modifying to run the 2 hotels on their own.
I can see what it looks like on 2 to 3 stories on the
Yeah.
existing too. That may give a little bit more cohesion if,
Yeah.
and then we're adding those River Neck Road parcels.
Run them, see what it looks like.
So that would be number 9.
Yeah.
It's really all information gathering at this point.
Anybody else have any?
So it's three, 4,
Anything in
8
these?
is tabled, I'm sorry, 3 and 4, 5 is tabled, 8 is potentially
No,
being modified.
4
and-
is
Four is
tabled.
tabled. Four is
Five-
UPS.
McCarthy Middle School.
I'm sorry, it's 3, 4 is
Dead
tabled,
serious, McCarthy Middle School.
I don't know why we can't.
5
8
is
is
a
being
no.
modified,
We can't pick
and
five.
9 is being
6 is a no,
introduced.
7's a no, 8's a no. 9
8
is
is being
Riverneck,
being
and,
modified, I
I'm
thought.
not
or
kidding.
8 is modified to be just the hotels, or I made that 10.
School
Oh, you
property,
made that 10.
We can't zone that area?
you could, but it's not available. It's
Okay.
governmentally owned.
Oh, so
Can
government.
I ask one more question?
It's eligible, but I'm not sure how it would be viewed.
I think it would be viewed great if we knocked that building down.
Center School?
McCarthy.
Someday.
Yeah, it's getting a little long in the tooth.
But you probably most likely replace it with another
We
school.
need it right now.
Oh, that, yeah, would be over at the.
Can I just ask a-
Sal had the
Schools
plan,
are
Sal had the
bursting at
plan
the
already,
seams. What's up, Anita?
12 years ago.
I just have a quick question on the process, just because we're talking about the meeting house road. So it wouldn't be through a special permit. They would come though for a site approval. How much control do we have on style, like, you know, to make something fit for the town? Like, if we wanted something in the center of town, how much leeway do we have?
the height of the
I guess this is a
building.
question for
Yeah,
Evan.
Not
You-
much.
You can be as prescriptive as you want. As we all know, it's a challenge to create zoning that architecturally provides a high level of predictability, but it can be done
But we have to do that within the zoning when we
within the
create
zoning,
these
correct?
zones.
Correct.
Are there
We
any,
can't do it
Not
after.
during the
You
process.
can't, right, you can't, there's no discretion, there's no like negotiation or discretion as part of a site plan approval. But the zoning that you're asking town meeting to adopt can be very detailed in an attempt to predict an outcome. You can use text, graphics. So it's common practice. I mean, Lowell does it. If you Google form-based codes, you know, you'll see some examples. But it takes some work.
Then my recommendation for Riverneck, if we can just kind of think about that when we're looking at including it. I think what we did for UMass West Campus was really good. So maybe some of the setbacks and what have you and height requirements.
It may require me doing a little bit more research too as to what EOHLC considers burdensome requirements that may not be accepted.
Yeah, if you could find that out for us, that would be helpful.
But-
And
but
also
to
the
your-
age restricted, so at UMass West, there's an age restricted portion,
That would need to be modified.
so that would be just carved, it would
Either
need to-
carve it out, or you can remove it. There will need to be modifications to the UMass West overlay district, if we're going to use that for MBTA
Just make it a
zoning.
donut?
We can simply take out the age-restricted parcel, or we can change the zoning or create new zoning, assuming that that wouldn't get built as part of MBTA zoning.
I don't like the donut though, because it might be a geometric.
It's on the perimeter.
Okay.
but like
But
the
yeah.
architecture and everything, what does a
Relation.
town like Newburyport do? Because they're an MBTA community.
I don't know what they're gonna do, but certain districts within
Whatever they write into their
Newburyport probably
laws,
have
should
historic
copy it.
district guidelines. But they're gonna have to, yeah, I mean, if they wanna maintain a certain character, they're gonna have to spend a lot of time and energy crafting, language.
Should we let them do the work and just copy it? Is that plagiarism?
Well, I think, I would, we have some design guidelines, I'll send that out to the board. I think to Anita's point, whether it's UMass West or Riverneck, you can model it, you don't have to model it 4 stories, and you can play with the setbacks, the perimeter setbacks from property lines. And then if we really wanted to, customize it, we could find out whether we can do a tiered approach. I don't know if the MBTA zoning allows for tiered setbacks or tiered height. Maybe it does, I don't know.
Could we put up that thing in the middle again? The missing middle graphic?
And that's what we should be shooting for, right?
And to me, the uncertainty around the guidelines and the zoning definitions and how restrictive we can be is one of the reasons why I want to keep the UPS parcel in the mix, just in case we need that backup. If we find
the
that we can't
acreage?
be as restrictive as we want to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, but aren't there other areas in town that, I agree with your statement, I understand what you're doing, right? But why can't we do it with other properties as well in town? You guys have picked UPS, it will not be developed because they're not gonna leave. But if we're going with that intent, then there's 20 other areas in town, we can do the same thing.
But I think the impacts of those areas, if we can't be restrictive at Riverneck or UMass West, then we're not going to be restrictive in those other areas, and I think the impacts of those other areas could potentially be bigger,
Okay.
especially the ones we've already removed.
Okay.
That'd be my opinion.
I think using that logic, District 7 might not be a bad option in that scenario.
Yeah, true. Can we shoot for, do you think, can you find out for us if we can shoot for within our zoning, tailor it so that we get whatever we decide we want? Say it's courtyards or a cottage look, like the true middle of the middle
Yep.
is what I would like to see built there. And so I wonder, I guess if that's the case, then we're probably gonna need
A lot more acres.
200
Yeah.
acres or 150 acres or something, unless we come up with 500 acres, 500 units at the Radisson. How many room-
We have UMass West.
You want true middle.
Have UMass West. That's our race in the hole, right?
What's
Is that-
true
Am I
middle?
reading this correctly?
I kind of based
Which one?
the scenario that I put together around that being the
So
focal.
I guess with the remaining areas that we're trying to come up
This
with, we're gonna
category.
shoot for that middle, is what she's trying, I guess,
Yep.
we're trying to,
Have to. Because we don't prefer this, but.
right?
Yeah,
Am I-
I'll definitely
I'm with you.
get
Good thought.
into the try and get into the zoning aspect for the, as we're kind of narrowing our.
But you
our-
could even send this out to the state right now, and they'll accept it for now, and then we amend it, or is it set in stone once we start?
So the next step would be, we would be submitting a whole package with compliant zoning.
Final package, all right.
Final, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And that's due by 24?
Yeah, I think it's kind of getting on the schedule. We haven't formalized the scope yet, but I think we're shooting for kind of having any kind of informational meeting, public meeting in the fall to give us time. So I would want to get back to you probably next month with a pared down district and a little bit more information on the zoning, so we can get that final kind of land area, and then I can kind of dig into the zoning, and we can have a better discussion about.
Spring 24 then, right?
When's the deadline to the state? I thought it was late fall of '24.
December 31st is the deadline.
That's for adoption,
Of
For
'24 or
adoption.
'23?
24.
When do we present to them? My question is, do we have to go to town meeting to get their approval
Yes.
for the final?
Yeah, so you can either do spring of '24 or fall of '24.
So we can get we can get kind of a pre-approval, kind of a tentative agreement or tentative approval prior to the adoption.
Okay.
There's a 90-day
So-
review period.
Worst case scenario, what happens if you go to the fall of '24, does not pass town meeting?
Uh-oh.
What happens then?
It's undetermined. other than as of right now, the state has indicated that you would be non-compliant and you would not be eligible for certain state grants.
So would we want to try to shoot for the spring?
Some
and
towns,
then-
some
and then
towns are
have a
doing
fallback
that, some
if
towns
need be?
are doing that. It's entirely up to the board as to how you want to proceed.
Yeah.
I believe the scope's kind of, with the way it was going to be written, would be, we would try to shoot for the earlier,
Spring.
the spring meeting.
And the more outreach we do.
We wouldn't make it to fall,
public,
though,
the
right?
better we're gonna be at town meeting.
Not this,
Not under this,
Sorry, Chris, what?
The more outreach we do and input we gather, the better we're gonna do at town meeting.
No, I agree. I'm just saying, worst case scenario, if you don't make it in the spring,
Yeah.
we take their comments, we revise a plan, and then we have one more last shot, which would be the fall.
Yeah,
Fine.
I think that's a good template. All right,
You're right.
are we,
It'll all work out.
Paul wants to volunteer to present.
do we kick this horse
Hit to death, yeah.
to death?
Have for me to present.
Should we move on to the,
Thank you.
he's still here.
No.
He's next up, although I can't find my agenda. Oh, it's on the back, sorry. The zoning conflicts presentation, right?
yeah. So at the request of the town of Chelmsford, NIMCOG had conducted an analysis of land use and zoning conflicts in 15 areas throughout the town. The conflicts were kind of broken down into 3 categories of non-conforming uses, abutting zoning district conflicts along the roadway, and abutting zoning district conflicts within a neighborhood. The report I actually didn't have any, it was done by my predecessor, so I don't have too much familiarity with the report itself, the production of the report, but I'm here tonight where I can answer any questions, and then if I don't have an answer, I can get back to you on it. But it's a pretty straightforward report. I think there's pretty good detail in it, and I'm happy to explain if there are any areas of confusion or.
Golden Cove? Do you have any thoughts?
Not at this time.
Okay.
So, I mean, I think we need to kind of look through their recommendations and maybe pick, if we think there's any low-hanging fruit of conflicts that we think we could bring in the fall to resolve, then we'd have to make quick work about it. Because the warrant gets signed in August sometime, right?
usually early September.
I think limiting housing on Golden Cove would be a good thing.
What was, I didn't get a chance to review it, I'm sorry. What was the highest level conflict?
They didn't grade them.
Yeah, I don't really have the
Evan,
context.
or anyone saw it, what's the highest, what's the low-hanging fruit that is major conflict right there?
I think the board identified Golden Cove as low-hanging fruit.
I mean, we also
But they recommended
thought,
not to do anything
Yeah.
with the zoning, which
Yeah.
doesn't make sense to me.
we also thought Monmouth and McFarland being residential was something that we thought we should offer them. And at the time of, in the midst of the Riverneck
Yeah.
conflict, they weren't interested in that
At all.
at all.
How,
The landscape's changed. I don't know if. what-
yeah, and however, that was without the
Residential
Riverneck.
being developed across.
That was without Riverneck being included in that discussion. The recommendation here is
We should
to,
wait on that.
is to change McFarland, the other, Monmouth, and Riverneck,
Okay.
all three to residential.
Oh, I didn't even
Which
look.
makes sense based off how that road is to begin with,
And
right?
Davis is already locked in
Bert.
right now anyway, so.
Well, they're not locked in.
So even if it was changed, the zone was changed, they can still build.
Yeah, that's why they subdivided to those 4 lots.
Oh, grandfathered, yeah.
Well, technically, any current landowner could do something similar as well.
Right.
Coming up without changes.
Mhm.
All these changes.
However, it would prevent future expansion.
Exactly, after that grandfather time.
Mhm. So I would like to prioritize Riverneck, Monmouth, and McFarland.
Okay, I would say if we're gonna do that, then we should put together like a rough concept of what we want that zone to look like, which they sort of did. And then invite all the members of those neighborhoods and the butters to a,
Because there's some new
Agenda.
information that came out recently, so
Mhm.
they're gonna wanna talk.
So does that have anything to do with,
We don't have to do anything with it.
no, with the MBTA thing that we were proposing, looking at those lots? If we turn this into RB, can you still look at that?
As
And
long
that's
as long as the MBTA is an overlay. You can't have two underlying districts apply to the same area.
right.
So it's
But
gonna
you could
actually
carve
create-
out
it's gonna create a
that-
bigger conflict.
Not really.
Eventually, when we switch it, it'll be just two.
If you carve out that property as MBTA and the rest of the area as residential, that wouldn't necessarily be a conflict.
No, but
It'd
if
be
you go
less
to
of a
a
conflict.
high-density residential area, the neighbors are gonna go bananas again.
Not if we limit it, if we're limiting the density to that low end of the density.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
Which-
those cottage
So,
style.
right, if we can do it that way.
What you're saying, Mike, is if the board presents two options to the neighborhood, and one is RB and one's MBTA, the neighborhood's clearly gonna choose RB.
Yeah, no, I was just saying is, if we're, on one hand, we're talking about an MBTA, we're looking at that lot,
Developers and-
and then we're coming along now, we're gonna rezone to a single-family
Agreed,
neighborhood.
agreed.
We're creating a conflict internally ourselves.
It'll
You're
never,
creating a conflicting messaging,
That's
is
right.
what you're doing.
Yes, so thank you for clarifying.
Not
Yes.
only to the
Our
neighborhood,
messaging
but
is
to
very
the property
confusing.
owner.
Yes.
yeah.
So, but
Why,
just to be
why
clear
would
though,
that be the
Riverneck Road
case?
is a very long road that right now is residential, IA over Route 3, and then it goes back to residential. So what this is proposing is making it all residential, which should be, because it's not a road that's meant for industrial. That is clear. And I think we're fixing a conflict there. And then we're looking at whether or not the river, that two parcels of land becomes an MBTA overlay
That's fine.
if we can,
It's fine, it's a
manage
mapping
that.
exercise.
I don't necessarily
for
think
Riverneck
it's-
Road.
That's fine, sorry.
yeah.
Yeah, I
We
mean,
don't have to do anything right now, but it's in the discussion, so.
so, to the chair's point, if you intend to pursue this and advance it for fall town meeting, it's a very tight timeline, primarily because you're not meeting until August 9th. So the warrant is signed by the select board on, I believe, September 11th, which would mean that your hearing would need to be, and you meet on August 9th and the 23rd. So if you're not going to schedule any special meetings, the hearing would open no later than August 23rd. And it'll be advertised on the 16th and the 9th.
Is putting this on spring too much?
I think putting anything on spring right now is too much.
Why don't we just table this?
I was talking about fall.
I was talking about fall.
I'm
Yeah, but
fall-
you're not
Oh,
gonna
that's what I
make
meant.
fall. You're not gonna make fall, is what
That's,
I'm talking
it'd be
about.
very, very
That's what I
tight.
meant. The fall, I
So
think fall is
so
too
in
much.
spring, we'll be bringing up the MBTA and this.
Yeah, I don't think we should do them at the same time.
So in theory,
No.
this should be tabled to the fall of 2024.
But I
I
think we need
think
to
if it's a
start the
low-hanging
process.
fruit, we should do it and try and make the timeline. I mean, we'll have to, I don't know. I mean, I haven't
We can
written.
be, I can commit to beginning the process, notify the residents, do the legal ad and schedule the public hearing. what I can't do beyond that is engage with the, have any guarantee with the engagement with the public and the neighborhood.
Right.
So we can begin that process, and the board can, table it.
We can
if
pull the
need
plug
be.
if it doesn't, if it's not working.
If that's,
I don't know what the rush is. We already had a special meeting, tried to do this with the neighborhood. The
Exactly.
neighborhood shot it, our idea.
No,
Exactly.
Mike, we did
Too
not
many
do this
different
with the
voices
neighborhood. We did
right
a
now.
partial solution
We
with
did
the
it with-
neighborhood.
It's only gonna take one of them to object. It's only gonna take.
So I'm just saying.
And I don't think
what's the-
they'll object to this.
I agree with you. I don't think they're gonna object to it.
think
But why are we jumping
I don't
through
think
hoops
everybody's lockstep,
for a
is what I-
neighborhood that already didn't want it, and now they're gonna want it because things have changed? Let's get to it next spring. Let's
They
do it right.
didn't want the proposal that was presented to them with only those two streets because it
You're
didn't
speaking
fix a
for a lot
problem.
of people. You are speaking for a lot of people. I tend to think that's not the case, all right? So this is gonna take
I
some
did speak
public
with
input.
people after that meeting,
Okay. I'm
and
just saying,
most of them
there's
said
people that are
that did
thinking
not fix
otherwise.
the problem.
I think there are people thinking otherwise.
That's why we have public hearings.
I think regardless, I think we would not consider it low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, no.
That's what it sounds- yeah.
I'm not saying it's low-hanging fruit. I'm saying,
Yeah,
Okay.
no, I think
Something-
low-hanging
Point
fruit
well
might
taken.
be,
Golden
might be
Cove.
better if you're making an adjustment to a commercial overlay, might be a little bit easier.
my
I do
only,
think we ought to do that. I do
my
think
only
we-
concern with starting that now is to have that discussion. And because we're also considering the Riverneck and the MBTA, we should be doing both as a holistic vision
I
as opposed to
understand that, Papa,
piecemeal.
it's gonna be a lot
point.
for everybody to.
Yes, it will be. That's why I'm not saying it's a fast process. But I would not want to do one without the other.
Yeah.
I think doing one without the other is a mistake because it's, again,
Spring's gonna be busy.
potentially a problem.
I think we should, I mean, I agree with you. I think we should do the Monmouth and McFarland and so forth, but I think that's gonna take time.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Starting now is a good idea, and I
Yeah.
think simultaneously, if we can identify something that's a little bit easier, that we could do that too.
I would agree with that.
Golden Cove.
So we may, I don't know if we want to, I don't know if you want to appoint like a point person for each one or not. That might be, somebody who's going to propose a strategy and so forth and so on. Might be a way to do that.
So when would we have our first public input?
I mean, that can happen anytime. The complicating factor is Davis and Riverneck will likely be back on your regulatory agenda in September, October, November, December. So conceptually, you're talking about trying to engage with the neighborhoods on zoning changes simultaneously with MBTA and potentially a regulatory matter that's coming in under a zoning freeze.
And he's locked in under the grandfather clause anyway, so it's kind of just, I don't know.
So on one hand, it's good that all of those conversations go on at the same time because everything's kind of coordinated. But the challenge is some people have a tendency to, try to blend them, and you can't really blend them legally.
Right, and I think the neighbors are gonna wanna know what's happening
Right.
with,
And the only
The Riverneck
guarantee of the
Road.
three option is the regulatory item, because the board has a legal jurisdiction to make a decision.
I did notice in other towns, they're having nights where they're explaining, Concord's having a night at the library where they're actually, like, someone showing up and explaining the whole thing. I don't know who's showing up for these, but I would assume a lot of the people from those neighborhoods would at least be there. They can get the word out to other people.
you mean for
You
the
know-
MBTA?
To learn about
Communities?
what we're up against with the MBTA. They have signs posted outside of town halls and stuff locally.
The MBTA scope and the timeline contemplates doing public
Outreach.
presentations.
Yeah.
But I think that's dependent upon the board coming up with some conceptual proposal.
Is that, so they're further ahead?
Yeah, likely.
Well, I think the timeline I saw somewhere was the fall, right?
Yes.
And I'm not recommending that we take action on Riverneck anytime soon. I'm recommending that we start the discussion so that way we have a holistic view of what we're doing in that area and not doing it piecemeal and then having to see that we made a mistake later on.
Yeah, the thing that the thing I was thinking earlier when I was looking at it is that, in some degree, if you rezone those streets to residential, you're essentially changing the boundary, but you're still gonna have, you're still gonna have the issue. And so I don't know if, you know, one of the alternatives mentioned was to look at some sort of, you know, buffer zoning, mixed zoning with some sort of zoning that goes between them. And if that's something that we're gonna consider, I think we definitely wanna think through that before we, you know, start proposing. I think that goes hand in hand with changing the IA to residential zoning for the streets. I think that's part of it too, so.
Which I had mentioned, introduced this concept that Joel's talking about. Multifamily or a former fashion of multifamily can serve as a transition zone between single-family and commercial industrial, which is why the SEOID, that's one of the concepts of that, is try to address and try to address existing conflicts using multifamily. So while McFarland and Monmouth are currently single-family, back to the missing middle, there's nothing preventing the board from allowing duplexes there or quads there as a transition between the industrial and single-family.
Okay, wait a minute, hold on a second. Like,
Include them in the
first of all, we've got
MBTA.
all of Riverneck Road there. Like, then we're making it even more complex, because again, it's single family, IA, then single family again. Like, the whole complex, like, I would be a little, I wouldn't necessarily throw in multifamilies for those roads.
I'd leave them alone, to be honest with you. I'd just leave them alone.
Yeah,
wonder-
like,
I wonder if-
like, in Riverneck, please, Riverneck Road is, when we're talking about Riverneck Road, it is a long road. It's not just that little section.
I'm wondering if having a point person, you know, at least look at proposing some strategy options would be a good idea. In other words, it's good to talk about it in general, you know, forum, but you do want to have some concrete ideas sort of put together that fit well based upon what we've discussed, and I think
So-
that's harder to do.
But
Why
isn't
don't
that
we
what the,
make that our
isn't that what
homework for
NEMCOG
the-
did?
What was that?
Isn't that what NEMCOG did? They proposed, they looked at all of the
Right.
zones and.
And now, so now
are
we
coming
need
up
to
with
hone
proposals.
this, like,
Yeah, but we were just talking, I mean, we
25
were just
pages
talking
or
about.
20
you know,
pages.
I think they have different pieces, but we're now talking about how do you put those pieces together, right?
Well, or how do you triage them?
Yeah.
I mean, we need to prioritize which ones we think are A, worth doing, and B, gonna be achievable in a realistic timeframe. So
So
we don't
that one
have,
definitely needs more debate.
yes.
All right, so that's tabled.
Right.
All right, that's tabled.
Up.
I-
That isn't what I was suggesting. What I was suggesting is that somebody, one or two people take an action to come back to the board with some strategy options as to how these might get adopted. So that you can say, yeah, that's a path we want to go on, as opposed to just sort of patching together different ideas.
And tabling something means not discussing it till later. I
Well,
would not want to do
Trying to find the
that.
low-hanging fruit right now.
For quick action, yes, but that doesn't mean we should not discuss Riverneck. Because I
We
think we
need
have
public
to
input.
discuss it
Yep.
in the context of the MBTA decisions that we have to make sooner rather than later.
May I make a suggestion? Mike's going to be back here August 9th, a month from now, essentially. Get the model on Riverneck Road.
Should that be a public hearing?
Well, it's a
Would
public
you
meeting.
mind?
I mean, it's a public meeting.
So we can.
I mean, if you want, we can invite,
Abutters.
if that's
We
what you
don't have
want
a
to do.
plan yet. We
Yeah, I mean,
haven't figured out which parcels.
Yeah.
August 9th, you're simply going to do what you did tonight. You're going to get a cursory look at Riverneck Road and decide whether you think it is a piece of the puzzle or it should be not a piece of the puzzle.
And the Radisson.
So August 9th, the board gets the minimum information on MBTA Riverneck Road.
Right.
And then maybe September, October, November is where you begin the engagement with specific neighborhoods on land use and zoning conflicts, prepping for spring. I don't think you're gonna find any low-hanging fruit for fall town meeting.
Okay.
related to land use and zoning conflicts.
Yeah, I don't think it's worth pushing either.
Since we're starting off with the name conflict in the title.
If it was easy, it probably would have been solved already.
But
Okay,
at least on August 9th, the board will have a clearer understanding as to what MBTA zoning means for River Neck Road.
so I think our goal for August 9th is to get the preliminary information from you on the 2 new parcel ideas, and then hopefully for us to pick which 3 parcels we're gonna use. that
2 or
we
3
think-
districts, right.
What 3 districts we're gonna use that we think are the most
Viable.
appropriate or
And then in the
viable.
fall, you'll, working with NIMCOG, you'll do public input sessions. We'll be able to do targeted invites, as Chris mentioned, broad invites as well.
Now, at the beginning, when you presented, I think you mentioned that in the recommendations for the MBTA zoning, you also took into account the zoning conflicts document and your findings there. I'm assuming you'll do the same thing with River Neck?
Yeah.
When you talk about that? Okay, so then we can have a little bit of context about whether the MBTA zoning would work with your proposal for the zoning conflict changes or not.
Yeah.
Okay,
Whether it would improve it or complicate it.
okay.
So we're kind of tabling, but not really. We have some sort of plan of engagement.
Okay. So now the last thing is.
Mike, thank you.
Yeah, Mike, thank you very much. The last thing is the review of the master plan implementation matrix. The hour being late, I would propose that we hold that till the
Want
next.
to push that to the 9th?
Yeah, does anyone
I love that idea.
object to that?
So what's the objective of the review? This, Evan told me
It's
this
just
is
an
from the
update.
2020.
So as I
master plan.
mentioned in an email, you probably didn't get that initial email from a couple of weeks ago.
Thanks, Mike.
The Master Plan Implementation Committee,
Yeah.
which Mike is on, representing the planning board, has scheduled its review of the land use and zoning matrix. And they're asking the planning board to provide that update. So the exercise for tonight and maybe August 9th,
When is the master plan meeting? Do you have a
August
date?
16th,
The 16th, okay.
yes,
So we do have time to do it on the 9th, but we need to
Yes.
commit.
correct.
What else are we talking about on the
And the
ninth?
product is our updates.
Effectively, our
report,
update.
status
It's a
report.
status report.
Yeah. What actions or considerations has the board taken to implement
Yeah.
these or advance these? So what
okay.
actions have taken place?
Report card.
If not,
Just put
is the
F-
board
F-
scheduled
F-
to?
And have you provided like additional input on that?
Yeah, it's all in here.
On status is my interpretation
Okay,
as to
okay.
where the board is.
And I
Okay.
think that
Okay.
a couple more of us I need to go over it. again.
So MBTA zoning is also on for August 9th. DPW would like to come in and talk about usage of your existing traffic mitigation accounts. I'm not aware of any regulatory items at this point. And then obviously the master plan matrix.
Okay.
Why can't we start some of this tonight?
We can.
It's only 9 o'clock.
Good idea.
Because that could be a longer meeting if we have to decide on MBTA stuff. So what do we need to do with this?
Basically, just pass through it, see if you agree with the status, and,
They want next steps, right?
yeah, and then consider if there are next steps that can be expressed at this point.
I mean, I would like to review the goals and objectives of the overlay districts.
I think we all would.
Inclusionary bylaw.
Yeah, but that has not started, so it's, next step is start.
So why don't we just put a date to have this started in the fall of?
Gonna say,
Oh.
What?
schedule it for a working meeting? or-
Yeah, we can schedule for in the fall, or we do it in September or October.
Or maybe
that
the
we'd have a
second,
meeting.
did we decide we're not having a second meeting in
Yeah, I think so.
August?
That was my understanding.
No, you haven't gotten that far. You've tentatively canceled July 26th. Chris cannot make it. Your August 23rd meeting has not been officially canceled yet.
Well, maybe we should start that then.
My birthday.
Review it, like, look at the inclusionary bylaws and look at the overlay districts.
I'm not sure I'm gonna be here. Moving a kid in school, college.
Oh, yeah, that's,
It's a busy time.
you
But-
could maybe, you could Zoom.
While moving boxes?
Well, that's when you take a break and say, I gotta take a break here.
I mean, don't
All
cancel.
right, so you
this
want,
meeting.
you want to schedule a dedicated work session for August 23rd?
I think that makes sense, if most people can be there.
And one of the purposes is to, per the first recommendation, 2.10/3.7. Okay.
That means we're probably gonna have some homework to read about them.
Somewhat,
Homework
yeah.
beforehand.
Well, I mean, that's why I'm putting it out a
It's
month
list
and
of the overlay districts.
gives a little time to think about it and look at it.
Summer reading.
Yeah, beach reading.
I asked Evan to provide us a list of the overlay districts so that we know which. ones.
Actively pursue federal and state funding to implement critical projects in this area. Is that something that we're meant to do?
No, as you can see on stakeholders,
Okay.
you're not the primary.
So are we doing that? Are you doing that?
Yeah, we do that through like Mass Works grants and so forth. I think it's the second, maybe the second last sentence there.
Now, this mentions 913 Acton Road, but that's pretty much,
Completed,
that's
Yeah,
complete.
so we
That part's
crossed that off,
completed.
right?
yeah.
Which one are you on?
314.
It's the second one.
Oh, second one.
So
You probably
the
wanna know.
first sentence applicable to the planning board, and that assumes that your review of the overlays results in, a continuation. So it's ongoing. It's more of a regulatory matter for the board.
So status would be ongoing too?
Encourage
Yeah, I
industrial
mean, per
development.
regulatory items.
Yeah.
Evan, I got a quick question. Speaking of that, with the COA Press Cafe, are we seeing any other developers coming to town because of the drive-through? I know we
I'm
applied.
not aware of any other
No one's
inquiries.
inquiring on it yet?
No, no.
Because of what?
We approved
The drive-through.
3, right? Drive-through?
Up to 3
Up
per
to
town
3.
meeting.
So I'm surprised how successful that is right now.
Yeah, they're doing well.
I think they've been open a
That-
quarter maybe,
We
so
haven't seen anybody
my
else
guess
start
is
to
the
come in.
industry standard is probably wait for a couple of quarters to
Yeah.
see.
I just didn't know if there was
results.
anyone approaching you guys
No.
yet with ideas. Good, thanks.
Yeah.
The 315 is similar, planning board, ongoing implementation via 129 regulatory items.
Right. And I haven't heard any more news of 316. I haven't heard any more on the rail line.
Yeah, I mean, that's an example where I don't see, it's noted the planning board is not really the lead here, it's the select board.
Right.
But if and when the select board choose to appoint a dedicated committee, I imagine the planning board would be part of that.
So we're supposed to present our updates to the master plan implementation committee of what we're doing.
Yes,
Yeah.
Okay.
what we plan to do.
And Evan, I'm assuming that the primary person or primary stakeholder responsible for driving it is the first one listed?
Yes.
Okay.
2.1, a theme we've talked about this evening, investigating whether additional improvements to the design review process are warranted. That specifically has not commenced, but clearly it's a theme that the board is interested in.
Wouldn't that be part of the review that we do in the first one?
Yes. So tied to 2.10, 3.7.
And also, I'm
2.10
assuming the
is-
MBTA work that we're doing.
2.10 is goals and objectives, right? 2.1 is the design review process. It's a different aspect of the overlay.
Yeah, but if we identify the goals and objectives, we can then,
Right, let's just do it all.
yeah.
2.2,
So do we add that to the August 23rd
Done.
work session as well?
Unless you want to try it again.
I'm sorry, I think Joel was saying something?
2.1, do we want to add that to the August 23rd work session as well?
We probably wouldn't have time.
Okay.
I think the goals and objectives would take,
Okay. So some subsequent work session?
yeah.
Okay.
2.2 refers to the revisions to 195.8. We brought those to fall town meeting, springtown meeting it was, springtown meeting, and that did not pass. So I've indicated it's completed. Board attempted to, and it failed at town meeting. So that, I mean, that's an update.
Yep.
If the board wants to attempt to revisit it and bring it back, you know, the board can make that determination. 2.3, contact mill owners. This notion is in the master plan. It talks about creating a dedicated mill overlay redevelopment district. My input on this is I don't think it's critically needed because the COID applies to the mill that's zoned, the both zone commercial industrial. So it allows mixed use. It's not customized for mill reuse and redevelopment. Both of those mills serve very different purposes in the marketplace. And they both seem to be quite stable as far as rents go. So it hasn't been commenced.
And there's no significant vacancies or any reason why we would want to,
No, I mean, the mill owner across the street from the mill, I'm sorry, the one on the,
Yeah.
so what is the east side, yes, the mill. She's expressed interest in doing residential conversion off and on over the years. The mill that has frontage on Middlesex Street was recently sold. That may be converted to self-storage, but we haven't heard anything. And then the mill where the establishment is, you know, it has mixed use, it has some residential.
Right. Now, would this concept also include the mill down at the end of Watton?
It could.
The mill where?
Yeah, why isn't that being developed?
The end of
Is it
Watton
what?
Street.
Is that where
That-
by the softball fields?
Yeah.
The old airfield place.
That mill is owner occupied and there's
They're busy in
There's
there.
a
Be a great
cloth,
place for
clothing,
group,
fabric business in there.
Windows.
Yeah, there's stuff going on.
Yeah.
Is there? It used to be an air filter place back in the day, but.
Yeah.
It's been a long
Yeah.
time since I've seen anybody do anything there.
The point being that none of those property owners have, you know, really engaged with the town, saying we need to work on zoning.
but if they did want to do a mixed-use residential and the businesses that they're operating now, they could under the COA.
Yeah.
Only the mill where the establishment is, the other two are zoned limited industrial.
Okay.
So that's why the master plan is recommending to
Okay.
continue to pursue.
So are we recommending that we
They
remove this, or?
Add an overlay?
Are we recommending that we do something, or we recommend that we don't need to do something?
You haven't had that conversation yet. It's simply a recommendation in the master plan, and tonight you're simply providing a status report.
Yeah,
Your status report could be not commenced, to be determined,
To be discussed.
to be
Okay.
discussed.
I mean,
Next steps.
Yeah.
I mean, it's more aggressive of planning than I feel like we've ever done on the planning board since I've been here. But,
Yeah, you got plenty on your plate.
but I mean, I think it would be awesome to see if they have an appetite for that. I mean, I think, I've often wondered about that mill,
Yeah.
for instance, why it hasn't been developed.
Ghosts in
It's
the
right on
basement,
the,
no
it seems
doubt.
like the best piece, one of the top piece of real estate in the town, right on the river. Like,
I think it's worth a discussion,
Yeah.
but probably not a high priority right now with all of the rest of the stuff that we have going on.
all right, conduct
so
a townwide analysis.
2.5, we just talked about the land use and zoning conflict.
So we just need to review and assess which ones we want to
Yeah, I mean, that's
prioritize.
obviously going to be ongoing. You're doing a phase one, you're going to start your review on 8/23. 2.6-3.2 talks about e-commerce, pop-up stores, dark stores, things of that nature.
Yeah, that might
I indicated that I think we've completed that and went
I'd
to
like to
town
bring that
meeting.
back.
I mean, there's been some discussion at town meeting and board that certain elements or components may be revisited.
Well, the fulfillment centers was readdressed.
Yeah, some of it's been addressed, correct.
But, I mean, I think e-commerce, ghost kitchens, dark stores, I mean, I guess there's nothing prohibiting people from doing any of those at the moment, right? As long as they don't trigger a major business complex special permit.
My initial take is, when we were initially discussing this 3 years ago, we were in the middle of COVID, and I think we all thought, at least Master Plan, myself, NIMCOG, thought that there'd be demand. We're now coming out of COVID, and the notion that Chelmsford is seeing a demand for dark stores, ghost kitchens, not in the traditional sense. There may be businesses dabbling in it and experimenting with it.
And there's nothing precluding them from doing that in the current zoning.
It would depend.
Yeah, there's
It
a
would
lot of
depend.
interpretation
Yeah.
that can go on in there.
You can dabble, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure you could open a dark store.
It changes the
Yeah.
business completely.
Yeah.
It's a different use, right?
Our definitions don't include or contemplate those concepts.
So, Evan, am I correct that we're not quite at the 10%?
We currently remain over 10%. We're at 10.43. That's based upon the 2010 census. The state has not officially released the 2020 census numbers. If you recall, when we were reviewing UMass West, the joint meetings with the select board, I had presented some projections, working with Housing Advisory Board, and we had indicated that once the 2020 census numbers came out, that we would fall below 10%. However, if you included the UMass West project, we would be back over 10%.
And we would include the UMass West project?
Well, it's
or
been
not?
approved.
Right.
It's been approved.
permitted.
As Joel and some others know with 40B, the number is it's a moving target based upon a variety of thresholds and actions that need to be taken. So, as you are aware, the only part of the project that the board has approved is the Trammell Crow portion, not the age-restricted choice component.
Right, and when are we doing that?
We've informed David that we would like him to submit as soon as possible.
Okay. Should someone follow up with him?
And he's prepared to do that?
He's preparing to do that.
Is he getting funding?
Well, he doesn't have funding in place, but he's, I don't think their legal agreement with Trammell Crow was finalized. Trammell Crow doesn't even own the property yet, per their PNS with the property owner. So there's complicated legalese that is preventing David from moving forward.
Yes.
2.8, amending the bylaws to incorporate LID. We have done that
Yeah.
quite successfully, I might add. 3.4, build a brand strategy working with the EDC, which has since been disbanded. The planning board's, I think, role in this is to continue to, implement the regulatory actions, through your overlays as appropriate.
What was 2.7 again? You have not commenced, but it sounded more like that you.
I'm sorry.
You haven't been able to complete it yet. because you-
2.7,
To be to.
we this is whether the existing inclusionary housing bylaw it mirrors 40B,
Yeah,
whether that should be modified,
right.
since we've reached 10%.
But it's,
That has not been commenced. Housing Advisory Board would be interested in working with the planning board on that. And some of it's gonna be tied to what the town does with MBTA zoning. The MBTA zoning does allow up to a 10% affordability.
I think we have to do 10%.
You don't have to.
No, I would like to do
Yeah,
10%.
yeah.
If the maximum is 10%, I want to do 10%.
Anything more than 10% requires an economic feasibility assessment. So that when we get to that discussion with NIMCOG, it may be worthwhile doing that, since our existing inclusionary mirrors 40B, and we certainly have at least one, if not two, projects in town that we've approved through local zoning overlays, 104 Turnpike being the primary one. And clearly that wasn't uneconomical for the developer. So
so have we commenced it or not?
we have not commenced that.
Why not? Are we waiting on something? Is the next action that?
No, that would be planning board. I think planning board needs to initiate.
If the Housing Advisory Board was, then who's the are you the appointed? Yeah. So is that something you should bring up with them, and so we can say our next step is that the planning board
I mean,
appointee is gonna?
I've only, they've had 2 meetings since I was the liaison. I've attended one. The first one was at my daughter's graduation. And, I mean, I personally would like to have us not reduce the affordability requirement, certainly. I mean, I don't know what this is proposing, but if anything, I might want to increase it, but I don't think, I don't think that's going to happen, so I mean.
Is this one done?
So, I don't know, does anybody want to reduce the affordability percentage?
I don't know that anybody does.
No.
Yeah, so
So
then
we're
it's
done,
done.
aren't we?
Yeah, it could be as simple as that, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Completed.
Completed.
All right.
So completed, no action.
Yeah.
Let's see, 3.17. This speaks to, during COVID, we got a state grant to do a market assessment on the highway interchanges. And that assessment made a series of recommendations, looking into the future as to what those existing retail districts,
Right, I remember
what
that.
challenges, market challenges they may face. So it recommended mixed-use zoning, it recommended e-commerce zoning. The COID provides the mixed-use opportunity, and as we discussed earlier, the e-commerce wasn't successful at town meeting. And then again, as part of MBTA zoning, some of those districts came up again. I will say that I think the town needs to be cognizant and aware of its long-term commercial districts.
Right.
And not be lulled into a false sense of security, similar to what happened on 129, where the town just gets accustomed to assuming that existing commercial and industrial districts will always be vibrant and competitive in the marketplace. The other way of saying it is the notion that Kohl's is in existence 5 years from now or 10 years from now, or the Stop and Shop is in existence. You cannot rely on that, and those are just big boxes that are functionally obsolete. And then what the market sees is a Stop and Shop goes out of business, and then a Big Lots moves in. So at least you'll have, an equal conversion as far as, assessed value, but the quality of the retail may be reduced. And this goes back to depreciation and market changes and
So what's
trying to
our
introduce
role
mixed
in?
use. Well, the recommendations encourage mixed use. The COID provides that
Right.
option. I think it's worthwhile for the board at some point to maybe look at that market study.
I mean, is there some, yeah, I would like to,
Yeah,
and is there
we can
some
look
way
at
to
it and-
incentivize that more?
There's always additional incentives that can be added into zoning bylaws.
When was that market study done?
Probably, it was middle of COVID,
Oh, it was?
literally, yeah. We did everything on Zoom.
Were they looking at data prior to COVID?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, they were looking
all they
at
really had.
probably past trends and projecting trends,
Didn't they looked at every intersection on one.
with the exception of Groton Road.
Yeah.
They did. They did look at it. and then-
They
but there
looked
was
at it and
residential
fairly-
on
Or
the
maybe it
side.
was,
Projected it
maybe
fairly
maybe it was
quickly.
with the exception of
I think it
129.
was 129.
Yes,
Was
yeah.
that the one they didn't look at?
Only along Route 3.
Would it make sense to re-engage that study for an update? Because things have changed significantly since COVID. I mean, all
Yeah.
of the trends that people thought were gonna happen in COVID are not necessarily
There's
happening.
gonna be market changes all the time.
Well, how about we start with looking at what they produced?
Let me send it
And
out.
then see if we
Let me
think
send it out.
it's,
Again,
obsolete.
based upon everything on your plate, I'm not sure it's a priority. I think COID serves as that immediate stopgap. It allows the marketplace to at least come to the board.
But what you were describing, or are you saying that you want to be able to look ahead enough to be able to anticipate certain market changes that would cause us to consider whether we should change our zoning, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, that's townwide, and, MBTA
Right.
discussion,
So
we're
what would be
picking
the
up on
what
that.
would be the period of that? Do you think that's like every year, every 3 years, every 5 years? I mean, I'm assuming we'd want to be in a regular pattern of doing this. Right?
So the master plan has done that every 10
Okay.
years.
Okay. Do we want to do it more frequently? Like
Oh my
I think it's-
five?
If the board thinks it's warranted, I'm not sure that there's drastic market changes every 5 years.
Okay. I was just based on what you were saying, I was like, well, how do we do that,
Yeah, I'm just, again, I'm just saying, the notion of Stop and Shop isn't there a year from now, may catch people off guard, or that Kohl's goes out of business, or Staples goes out of business.
All
Yeah,
possibilities.
yeah, to your point, like, I mean, not to
Well,
name
like-
names, but for several retail,
Sure.
we're seeing more and more retail
Exactly.
bankruptcies, and definitely I can see 1 or 2 stores, I don't wish anyone bad,
Well,
bad
it's more
business,
likely
but
than
it's more
not.
likely they're on shaky financial ground and they may be
Exactly.
out
So
of
some
business.
towns are being proactive.
Stop and Shop's
and,
probably out of here.
Looking at mixed-use zoning, or MBTA zoning, or different retail zoning. That's why we introduced the e-commerce. To your point, Chris, clearly that trend or that demand isn't what, we once thought. But that's not to say, so for example, Walmart is pursuing enhanced e-commerce at their Drum Hill site. What that means, I don't know, but I know that they are looking at it. So it's worth being cognizant of trying to stay ahead of the marketplace and not allow your your bread and butter districts to kind of go stale, for lack of
Language.
a better word. Yeah, exactly. 2.9,
I don't know how we do it, but I like it.
yeah, there were a variety of concepts bandied about as part of master planning. Many of them do directly involve the Board of Health. So, again, it's probably not a high priority. As you can see, it's an intermediate timeframe, which means, 5 to 7 years out. So obviously, that is not commenced. And then the last one, these are only specific to land use and zoning, 3.8. These have, I think these have all been completed, with the exception of any new mixed-use districts. And again, I think we've kind of begun that conversation tonight with MBTA zoning and potentially resolving some conflicts. And then, obviously, implementation would rely on any regulatory projects to come in through the overlays.
So then I would think that has commenced based on the mixed-use discussions that we're having with MBTA and the zoning conflicts.
Right, and also we're gonna do, starting August 23rd, we're gonna review the overlay districts and,
Okay, so I can update this and I'll recirculate it and put it on the agenda for the
And we'll be doing it on the 16th anyway.
August 9th planning board meeting.
so Mike thinks that the master plan implementation committee should present us with their update of what they're implementing.
Recommendations.
No, the master plan doesn't implement.
They should have recommendations.
They just pester everybody else.
No, but they should have recommendations.
Yeah.
They're not a doing,
Well, yeah.
they're a reviewing
That's fine.
committee.
You know
Yeah.
how those work.
We're pains in the butt.
Okay, so, we have administrative review, nothing, public hearings, nothing, new business, liaison updates.
Well, you just heard the,
Master plan implementation, no,
Yeah.
you didn't,
I-
we did that.
yeah.
I do have a liaison update from the Conservation Commission meeting last night. I would recommend watching the video, specifically for the 270 Billerica Road property. They presented to the Conservation Commission last night for a request for amended order of conditions. I didn't realize it, but that property was recently sold, which is why, the new owner is what triggered the design changes. I don't think that was exactly clear when it was presented here. But in that due diligence of the sale, soil sampling happened, and they found that the soil was contaminated. There are test wells on the property, and so after a little bit of a discussion last night, there is a DEP, Massachusetts DEP waste site cleanup entry. And so,
Gonna tie them up.
yeah, so that might have some complications, because they did find contaminated soil and
What did they
high
find
levels-
exactly, do you know?
PFAS.
PFAS, okay.
Yeah.
It's everywhere.
High levels in the soil and the water.
That's too bad.
So that might cause
It's
some
not the only place
complications.
in town.
So the Conservation Commission continued the public hearing
Right.
until their next meeting in a couple weeks. I won't be able to attend, so I'm wondering if someone else can go in my place.
What's the date?
I figured you might want to volunteer.
Yeah, send him. He knows what he's doing over there.
What's the date?
The
25th?
25th.
That's my birthday, I'm not going.
Yeah, I figured, Joel, you might want to attend that one.
Yeah.
I'll be on Martha's Vineyard.
So depending on what the plan is, I don't know what the cleanup plan would end up being. I don't know what the process is going to be, but it may require some changes that they might have to come back for.
If it's
I
PFAS,
don't
there's
know.
probably not a great deal they can do. They just wait it out and maybe pump a little.
But it is right next to the
Yeah,
watershed,
right, it is right next to the watershed.
very sensitive area, so I don't know what it means, so
Yeah.
just something to be aware of.
Thanks for the update.
Was the water district there?
Yes, he happened to be there
So Andy
talking
heard,
about.
Andy heard this? Was it Andy or was it?
He was
Todd?
there.
He was there, but I don't know, was he there for that?
He
part?
was.
Okay.
Okay, so we heard that, okay, good.
What fun.
Anyone else have any updates?
Just want to bring your attention to, it was in your hard packet this evening, an email from the town manager to me. I forwarded it to the board about potential fall zoning articles. We discussed, pretty much not advancing much. The town manager did identify or indicate that there's been recent inquiries or proposals for adult daycare in town, and unfortunately, adult daycare is not a permitted use. The details related to that is that it is a defined use in our zoning bylaw, but it's not in the use table.
Okay.
And the backstory related to that is, as part of the 2010 zoning bylaw review committee, it's another example where, not mistakes, but some inconsistencies occurred. So I don't think there was any intent by the zoning bylaw review committee to recommend to town meeting to delete it from the use table.
Right, just
It
inadvertently.
just happened.
Well, that ought to be a slam dunk if we can just define what it ought to look like.
So it is currently defined.
Okay?
We would just need to identify what zoning districts,
Okay.
the planning board.
Was it previously specifically recognized, and what districts was
Yeah, I could pull that information.
Yeah.
Is that something you want to potentially contemplate for fall town meeting?
Yeah.
That seems to me that would be fast enough.
That's fine, so as long as I think we agreed upon, if we're gonna bring something forward, that a board member presents it,
Yeah,
and not Evan.
yeah, I think it's safer from a,
I also want to put out there maybe to be on the agenda for the next meeting, if anyone else agrees with this, but I think in light of our sewer and infrastructure constraints, that I might want to insist going forward that all projects have the affordable units built, and that there's not a PILO anymore. Or if there is a PILO, that it gets increased significantly in amount, because,
it's,
The
yeah,
cost.
we've traditionally waived it way more than we should.
yeah,
Paying like a premium of premium.
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think that, I don't think have any units been built with the PILO yet? The first thing would be the affordable part of UMass West, is that right?
Correct.
So I don't think it's working great.
So Deirdre,
Well, we rely primarily on the housing authority to advance it. If the board of the town wanted to open that up and make a call for proposals for private development, the money may go a lot faster and further. But the concept from the get-go was to create truly affordable public housing.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's,
Not pocket parks.
it's served that it has served that purpose. Or the plan has been to serve that purpose.
Yeah, but I'm just saying now that we have no sewage, I'm not sure it makes sense to be gathering up piles of money instead of building the units when the land costs are so high, the infrastructure's not available. So I'm not sure that having that as a recourse even makes sense at this moment.
Unless it has a premium attached.
Unless it's
Yeah.
really freaking high.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, I would agree.
How much higher?
I don't know.
Well, I remember there was a very interesting conversation when we first tried to put numbers on it. That was what, about 7, 8 years ago?
Yeah.
And it was not an easy conversation. It's much harder to value these things than you might think.
Can you refresh our
Now,
people that weren't involved in that discussion?
well, how did it go? I guess it was very difficult to come up with an equivalent between an amount of money that you had collected and the number of units that you could get built with that money. I mean, there were vague ideas, but you
Hard
couldn't.
numbers, yeah.
Yeah, but you couldn't, nobody could draw, I mean, we looked at, okay, if so many one families, a two family of this, da-da-da-da-da, studio is that. But nobody could come up with a fairly, strongly defensible equivalence. And you need that equivalence before you can really operate with a PILO, I think. And because you have to know what you're getting in your PILO. And we never really did quite figure that out. Does that sound accurate to you, Evan?
The methodology was the gap between a market rate and
Yeah.
affordable. So we had data to support
that.
that, and that's how the numbers were based.
I'm
We
not sure
worked
anybody ever-
closely with David Hedison.
Yeah.
It was never intended to be dollar for dollar to actually construct a unit. And again,
Well, construct may be too much, it's
Well, you're giving
how much
up
money
units.
can influence the creation of how many units.
based
And that's a hard answer.
based upon the partnership with the
Right.
housing
I
authority.
agree with
That
Dean.
was,
It was very much based on that.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that's a conversation that you want to have with David.
Yeah, we
To
want
start
units,
there.
yeah.
Well, we haven't
What
talked
it
to David
costs
for a while in here anyway, have we?
It'd be
Yeah.
great to have him here.
Yeah, when's the last time we had him?
UMass. UMass. He was
Yeah.
on UMass.
Yeah.
Right, I'm gonna
I mean,
call
that
him.
was very specifically about the UMass component.
Right.
So,
so the numbers by default, because the market's changed, the numbers automatically out of the gate are gonna go up.
Right, and it hasn't.
Use the same
it hasn't-
methodology, they're
The
gonna
number
go
that
up.
we had when we decided a year or so ago that we were gonna enforce it more rigorously instead of taking money back from
yeah, just give
water
them-
and
yeah.
sewer and pocket parks, we decided we're just gonna start with enforcing it, and then we'll
Correct.
revisit the number later.
Right.
But, so I think we all agreed at that time that the number was too low, but since we hadn't been enforcing it, we just decided to start with that. But, so I think one option would be to dramatically increase it. But I think another option would be just to enforce,
Yeah.
build the units.
Well, I mean, that anyway.
Well, that's gonna
Nothing
incentivize
else.
it, right?
But we haven't done that.
There's gotta be a point where they build the units.
We haven't had
Let's
it.
get to
When's
that
the last
point.
pilot we had
Why
in
can't
front
we
of us?
get to that point?
We've been through this. Developers are willing to build the units, but they're gonna ask for more density. It's 40B, it mirrors 40B.
And besides, to some degree, we were shifting that
Yeah.
to David because David's been a very proactive and a
Which-
very effective
Right.
housing person. And so it's, in a sense, you're putting your money with the person you have
That
more.
knows the market.
You have more
He knows the
confidence, you
market.
have more confidence in.
Yeah.
But if we're not getting the production that we want, then I think there needs to be a conversation about that.
So when you, remember, David understood, he didn't feel strongly about whether the units got built or not, because he understood the limitations with many of these developers. They'd come in at 80%, they had no experience, they had no interest. So David understood that, and he made it very clear he was more than happy to take the money, take the PILO. You'll likely hear that again. And if we
Yeah,
can
but-
increase the PILO, he's probably more than happy to.
Yeah, but he was taking the money for the purpose of producing the units.
hasn't
If he's not producing the units.
Yeah.
Right,
And
it
it's
takes
only
him
right that
longer
the
to
years
produce units
Well,
because.
there have been
fine.
no
He can-
units
Zero,
produced.
zero
Right.
units.
And that could be in the.
It's taken an infinite amount of time because
Let's
it's
have this-
zero.
let's have the
You're batting
discussion with him.
zero, you're batting
He
zero.
could have taken money as part of Chelmsford Woods. There just wasn't a lot at the time.
How much money
Now,
does he
now
have?
there's 860 plus or minus, there's a sum of money there that he can actually leverage with federal and state grants,
And that's what we're using at West.
potentially.
You give somebody money, You want to know what are you
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
with it? And if they're not doing with it what you want them to do, then you outline what are the different options that you're thinking of pursuing and see what can happen.
I'd say at least have.
And this is,
that.
this is tied to the master plan recommendation of the board reviewing whether they should reduce the 25% to 10%. Since we've reached 10%, we've reached our 10%. So in your conversation with David and Housing Advisory Board, that also needs to be part of the conversation. Is moving forward, if you're gonna increase the PILO number, is that in conjunction with reducing the affordability percentage?
Or getting rid of the pilot.
Yeah, you can get rid of the PILO and they're gonna need to build more units. And the board, the reason that the board was reducing and waiving PILOs is because they didn't want more units. They wanted less units. And wanted other things.
But that, yeah, then that let us under 9%, under 10%.
Yes. The board,
We don't want to be there again.
We
got
don't
it.
want to be there.
Yeah,
right, which
I
the
don't wanna go
strategy
there.
is UMass West.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, I will take a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Seconded, somebody, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.